Chapter 1439. But soon, Qin Yu changed his mind. He discovered that even if this darkness ruler didn't wear a robe that covered his figure, he still wouldn't be able to see his appearance. This was because at this moment, as the darkness was retracted and the darkness ruler was exposed to the light, he actually began to burn. That's right. The flames suddenly rose without any warning and directly engulfed his entire body. It wasn't that flames appeared out of nowhere, but that the darkness ruler couldn't withstand the heat of the dazzling sunlight that fell down from above. Or it could be said that when his flesh and blood touched the light, he was set aflame. Thinking about it, this was the method of the Eye of Eternal Night. No wonder the moment the darkness ruler arrived, it was like a polar night had arrived, causing the entire world to be covered in a thick darkness. Not many people knew of the secret, but the Eye of Eternal Night just happened to be one of them. Qin Yu's heart calmed. After being struck by my Tao-shattering sword, even a true ruler wouldn't feel good, much less a fake like you. Now that the curtain of darkness had been lifted and he was exposed to the sunlight, his entire body was burning up. Could he still make a comeback? His thoughts subconsciously raced, but for some unknown reason, a faint sense of unease appeared in Qin Yu's heart. It was as if he had overlooked something important, and this matter itself should be related to the scene before him. Just as he was frowning and his thoughts raced, a calm voice suddenly sounded out, calm and gentle like the night. It was the darkness ruler who had spontaneously combusted. When darkness reaches its peak, light will naturally be born. I thought you already knew such a simple truth. But now it seems that you still haven't understood this point. What a pity. Qin Yu's heart shrank. He finally realized why he had such restless emotions just now. Light and darkness were two sides of the same coin. As someone who controlled both sides, he actually hadn't thought of this in time. This was a huge mistake. Who was this person in front of him? The incomparably powerful darkness ruler. In the world of darkness that was controlled by the Western wilderness, he was a formidable character that could rival the vast sun ruler. Just this alone was sufficient to show that this person's attainments in the way of darkness had reached the pinnacle. One didn't need to be a genius to know that Qin Yu was far from being able to compare with him. Otherwise, he would have become the incarnation of darkness, an existence that seemed like an abyss. If so, then there would be no need to worry about the ruler of darkness, since even he could comprehend the integration of light and darkness and grasp it. Why couldn't the ruler of darkness? The other party's ability was probably far above his own. In other words, the Lord of Darkness, who seemed to be spontaneously combusting and was about to be struck to the ground, had not actually suffered a fatal blow. The trump card that the Eye of Eternal Night had prepared all this time had completely missed its mark. As if to confirm Qin Yu's thoughts, the burning flesh and blood on the surface of the dark ruler's body rapidly turned into charred dregs and fell to the ground. The flames also fell and extinguished. The person who reappeared in front of Qin Yu was a slightly thinner young man. His skin was pale, as if he had never seen the sun before. He was incomparably handsome, and there was a hint of a smile at the corner of his lips. At this moment, he suddenly raised his hand and clenched it. The void trembled, and a round bead appeared. It was pitch black without any impurities, as if it was formed from the darkest night in the world. The round bead trembled continuously as it was pinched by the fair, delicate fingers trying to break free. Silently, tiny cracks appeared on the fingers of the handsome young man, and the red flesh and blood inside could be seen. Eye of Eternal Night, you and I have known each other for a long time, and we do have some understanding of each other. Although it seems like you don't know much about me now, to be honest, I do know you very well. In order to expose me to the light of day, you forcefully absorbed all the darkness in this world in an instant. It must feel bad to eat too much, right? But it doesn't matter. I will release you very soon. After saying that, he swallowed the Eye of Eternal Night in one gulp, as if he had put a grape into his mouth. This scene made Qin Yu's eyelids twitch. He thought to himself, "Is this the end of the Eye of Eternal Night? This is a little too *cat up." Before Qin Yu could sigh or curse, he suddenly felt his entire body turn cold. Then he could not help but feel frightened and fearful. He looked up and saw that the ruler of darkness, who had swallowed the Eye of Eternal Night in one gulp, was now looking at him with a faint smile. His posture was very calm. Peach Gardens, Miss Ninth. Actually, you should have thought of this long ago. Only a powerful figure like you, who suddenly rose up like a comet, would have the courage to break the established situation and attack the Western Wilderness and the other races. A clan brazenly attacked without any regard for the consequences. He looked Qin Yu up and down, looking at him very seriously. The smile on the corner of his mouth became wider and wider. A body of rules, a powerful divine seal condensed by the true God Tao, and some other things that even I can't see clearly. As expected, Miss Ninth is also hiding many secrets. Under normal circumstances, given enough time, based on Miss Ninth's growth trajectory, perhaps you would soon be on par with me. But it's a pity that you exposed yourself too early. You can only blame yourself for not being cautious enough. At this point, the ruler of darkness licked his lips, and his eyes suddenly flashed. "Don't you think it's strange that I'm talking so much to you?" Qin Yu thought for a moment and said, "I should be stalling for time." Such a simple logic. When he swallowed the Eye of Eternal Night just now, he did it cleanly and cleanly. How could his personality suddenly change so much? The ruler of darkness, who was extremely handsome a few years ago, and anyone who saw him would praise him, now had a look of admiration in his eyes. "I admit that I can't see through you anymore. Since you know you are stalling for time, you still dare to let me do what I want." He shook his head and said, "If the situation were different, or if I had already broken the shackles, perhaps I would spare your life. After all, there aren't many smart people in this world. It would be a pity to kill you like this." At this point, it was clearly about to end. It seemed that he had already suppressed the resistance from the Eye of Eternal Night. Darkness quietly bloomed around Qin Yu's body. The edges of the darkness wriggled, like a large black flower that had suddenly bloomed. It was clear that even though he had comprehended light and darkness as one, as the ruler of darkness, he still instinctively preferred to use the abilities of darkness. Qin Yu stuffily coughed, and his eyes instantly turned pitch black. The reason he cooperated despite knowing that the other party was stalling for time was because he needed time to sort out the chaos and backlash from the collapse of the great Tao within his body. Only then would he be able to mobilize his strength and fight for survival. Of course, Qin Yu was well aware that his chances of success were small. But from the start, he had never thought of using his own strength to resist the Eye of Darkness. That was foolish and had no chance of success. But Qin Yu wasn't an idiot. What he wanted to do was temporarily resist the ruler of darkness' murderous attack. Then he would latch onto the ruler's thigh. Bah! This was all because of that stupid Eye of Eternal Night. If it weren't for the fact that it insisted on showing itself in front of the ruler and wasn't willing to swallow its own bragging, things wouldn't have reached this stage. If he followed Qin Yu's plan and summoned that woman, then even if the ruler of darkness was twice as strong, he would still be able to smash him to pieces with a single hand. As for now, humph, he could only hope that the ruler of darkness' digestive abilities weren't as strong as his cultivation. Otherwise, even if the ruler smoothly descended, the Eye of Eternal Night that he rescued would likely have turned into a giant lump. Just as Qin Yu's eyes turned pitch black and he was preparing to face the ruler of darkness head-on and then summon the woman, there was a muffled groan in front of him. The black flower that bloomed around him stiffened for a moment before withering and dispersing. Qin Yu was startled. He looked up and saw a soft hand reach out from the space in front of the ruler of darkness. Since it could be called soft, it was naturally an extremely beautiful hand. As he looked at it, he couldn't help but sigh in praise. Then his thoughts drifted away. He couldn't help but wonder just what sort of person the owner of such a beautiful pair of hands was. But right now, the ruler of darkness clearly wasn't in the mood to appreciate this small hand that suddenly appeared in front of him. There was a dignified look on his handsome face, and his pupils shrank. From the fact that he didn't hesitate to give up on controlling the power of darkness that swallowed Chinyu, it could be seen that he was extremely anxious. And in fact, the ruler of darkness' subsequent actions proved this point. His figure retreated, but he didn't seem to be in a sorry state. He was like a duckweed that had been swept up by a strong wind and had a mysterious aura about him. His speed didn't seem fast, but in the blink of an eye he was already far away. But his expression didn't relax at all. Instead, it became even more solemn. The reason was very simple. That extremely beautiful palm was like a shadow that followed the body and landed less than 3 inches away from his eyes. As long as one was a bit slower and the other was a bit faster, it would immediately cause the blood to splatter in all directions. Humph! The sovereign of darkness let out a muffled groan as he forced himself to come to a halt. At the same time, his head suddenly exploded into a vortex. This vortex was pitch black, and it stretched as far as the eye could see. It was connected to an unknown, terrifying place. When that beautiful hand was just a hair's breadth away from the vortex, it seemed to sense some threat, and it suddenly vanished from sight. Just like when it first appeared, there were no fluctuations at all. But in the next moment, that hand reappeared and pressed down on the ruler of darkness' chest. It happened to be the terrifying wound that had been cut open by the Tao-shattering version of the EC sword. There was a light cracking sound that came from within the ruler of darkness' body. It was like a formidable strength had cracked open a solid object. The voice of the ruler of darkness suddenly echoed out from the vortex, but it seemed to come from far away, and the humming sound gave off an indistinct feeling. "You've been tricked." His words came to an abrupt halt. This was because the black blood that gushed out from the crack in his chest seemed to pass through the air as it landed on that pair of soft hands, not staining them in the slightest. What followed was a series of bell-like giggles. Chinyu felt a breath of air blow into his ear, as if someone were intimately leaning in. "What I owe you before is settled." A mysterious existence hidden within space-time. At this moment, through the fluctuations of the contract strength within his body, Chinyu was able to determine the identity of this person. Whether it was the stone pagoda or the eye of eternal night, both of them were filled with dread and hostility towards them. But this beautiful hand and the voice in his ear seemed to indicate that this wasn't the case. Of course, none of this was important. Even if this mysterious existence was as beautiful as a fairy, it was impossible for Chinyu to have any relationship with her that exceeded the boundaries of a normal relationship. And there was one more thing. Chinyu discovered that within his body, the binding strength produced by the contract hadn't dissipated. Rather, it was like an external force was pouring into his body, making it much more stable. It was like he had been promoted from a temporary worker to a formal contract worker. Chinyu's mouth was a bit bitter, because this wasn't the result he wanted at all. Since the contract had been formed, wouldn't it be better for everyone to let go and go their separate ways? Why did they have to be tied together? The stone pagoda disappeared without a trace, clearly not prepared to explain. Of course, Chinyu didn't have the time to waste right now, because he had suffered a palm strike from the mysterious existence hidden within space-time. The Dark Ruler's wounds had been severely wounded once more. His situation was clearly far from good. To put it in a cliché way, it would be to take advantage of his weakness to take his life. As Chinyu was thinking this, someone had already done so. It was clear that the consequences of the previous cracking sound were extremely serious. With a stuffy cough, the Dark Ruler stumbled. His chest and abdomen had ruptured, and a giant hole had appeared. But now not a single drop of blood flowed out from this hole. It was incomparably black, like a gaping maw. A terrifying, plundering strength erupted from the black hole, crazily absorbing the Dark Ruler's flesh and blood, wanting to completely swallow him. The one who had acted was naturally the eye of eternal night that he had just swallowed. This was probably what it meant to say that disaster comes from the mouth. Before, the dark ruler had said that he had coveted the eye of eternal night for a long time and wanted to use swallowing it as a turning point to break out of his shackles. In fact, if one looked at this the other way around, there wasn't a problem. If you wanted to eat me, could it be that you didn't allow me to think about eating you? And to the eye of eternal night, this was clearly a heaven-sent opportunity. The dark ruler had been repeatedly wounded and didn't seem to have any strength to resist. Qin Yu's eyes exploded with a sharp light. He stepped forwards and rushed forwards. At the same time, he lifted a hand and pointed forwards. Puff! With a dull sound, a massive chunk of the dark ruler's chest and abdomen burst apart, turning into a billowing fog of blood that swept outwards. But before it could spread out, it was swallowed up by the pitch-black hole. This finger was the combined effect of picking stars and defensive strike. Since Grab the Moon had a shortcut of swallowing the target's soul and rapidly increasing one's strength, Picking Stars naturally had a similar method. It was just that the target was a powerful flesh and blood. Of course, the restrictions were the same. It was fine to occasionally take a shortcut, but if one took it too often, there would be major problems. Strictly speaking, picking stars to forcefully seize flesh and blood wasn't as sharp and terrifying as Grab the Moon. But the first point was that the shortcut of picking stars was relatively easy to take. It didn't have as strong a restriction as Grab the Moon. Another point was that any supernatural ability or method in the world needed to be adapted to the local conditions. Today, when Grab the Moon was used to forcefully seize flesh and blood, when combined with the terrifying black hole in the dark ruler's chest, the power was truly terrifying. In the blink of an eye, the black hole expanded. The flesh and blood that had disappeared had clearly fallen into the eye of Eternal Night's stomach. Chapter 1440. This time, it would be difficult for the dark ruler to escape. Qin Yu didn't hesitate. He lifted a hand and thrust out a second finger, wanting to join forces with the Eternal Night Eye to send the dark ruler into the abyss of destruction. But at this time there was a loud roar. The dark ruler lifted a hand and smashed it against his chest, actually tearing his body in half. Through this method, he forcefully cut off the swallowing force of the Eternal Night Eye. Discarding the lower half of his body, the dark ruler only dragged his head and chest above. He roared and punched space, flying straight in. Without the support of the dark ruler's will, the lower half of his body was instantly swallowed up by the Eternal Night Eye. The darkness around him became even deeper. Shwa! A single eye appeared on the surface of the bead. It looked at Qin Yu, and intense fluctuations of thoughts echoed out in his mind. After you recover from your injuries, chase after my aura and arrive in the world of darkness as soon as possible. With a tremor, the Eternal Night Eye vanished from sight. It had clearly gone to chase after the fleeing dark ruler. Qin Yu took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the killing intent in his heart. Since the Eternal Night Eye had asked him to recover from his injuries before going, there must be a reason for it. Although he had severely wounded the Dark Ruler and even lost half of his body, he was still a formidable existence in the world of darkness that could compare with a ruler. So, if he wanted to kill him, he couldn't delay for too long. Otherwise, he might have some method to recover from his injuries. Thinking of this, Qin Yu felt a sense of urgency. But no matter how urgent it was, he had to first deal with the matters in front of him. Shwa! Qin Yu's figure flickered. He flew back to the Heavenly Sword Sect. With a sweep of his divine sense, he discovered Ling Zhao's aura. His luck was quite good. Although he had been implicated and injured, it wasn't a big problem. With a flick of his sleeves, the mess was swept away to reveal Ling Zhao. As he saw Qin Yu, he revealed a look of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Ninth." Although he hadn't personally witnessed what happened today, he had sensed the gist of it. Qin Yu lifted a hand and broke apart the shackles on his body. He said, "I still have important matters to attend to, so I cannot stay here for long. I will leave this to you to deal with." As he spoke, there was the sound of breaking air. It was Xianji, who had been hiding in the distance. She only dared to reveal herself after seeing the dust settle. "Ninth lady." She bowed respectfully, her tone full of respect and awe. After witnessing the terrifying might of Qin Yu's attack just now, in Xianji's heart, besides the ruler of the vast Yang world, there was no one more fierce than Mr. Ninth. In fact, even if she were to face the sovereign head-on, Xian Paper didn't believe that Miss Ninth would necessarily lose. Qin Yu nodded. "Xianji, you stay here for the time being to assist Ling Xiao in dealing with the matters of the Heaven-Span Sword Sect." After a slight pause, he continued, "Don't worry, something like this will never happen again." This was not a lie. Without accident, the ruler of darkness wouldn't be able to survive this. After killing him and obtaining the crown, he would become the new ruler of the dark world. Although the Eye of Eternal Night hadn't explicitly stated it, this should be his plan. Only with the status of the ruler of darkness would he be able to obtain the chance to enter the western wilderness. At that time, naturally, no one would look into what happened in the world Zeroth land. After obtaining Qin Yu's promise, Xianji relaxed and respectfully nodded. Otherwise, she really wouldn't have dared to stay in the Heaven-Span Sword Sect any longer. If someone were to see this, the next one to suffer might be her. Qin Yu lifted a hand to stop Ling Xiao from speaking. "I'll go first." As he finished speaking, he lifted a hand and pulled forwards. Space violently shook and a gate appeared. It was woven from thick peach tree branches. This was the spatial portal of the Peach Garden. Before this, because he wasn't sure where the Heaven-Span Sword Sect was, he could only travel through the void outside. Now that Qin Yu was here, he was the strongest and clearest coordinate. He could summon the portal and forcefully open a channel to return to the Peach Garden. Of course, this sort of ultra-long-distance spatial portal had extremely high requirements for one's cultivation and required a corresponding amount of strength to maintain it. But to the current Qin Yu, this wasn't anything at all. When the Peach Garden's portal finished forming, Qin Yu pushed it open and stepped inside. After a slight tremor, a strange light flashed in front of him. When the light returned to silence, Qin Yu pushed open the door and smoothly returned to the Peach Garden. The fluctuations of the transmission naturally couldn't be concealed from Bai Feng, who was controlling the barrier of the Peach Garden, as well as his eldest senior apprentice brother, who had already reached the true Saint Realm. When Qin Yu pushed open the door, the two of them were already waiting outside. As they saw him, they relaxed and revealed happy expressions. The eldest senior apprentice brother smiled and said, "I knew that junior apprentice brother would be fine." As he spoke, he looked Qin Yu up and down, and his complexion couldn't help but change. Qin Yu knew that the eldest senior apprentice brother had discovered that his great Tao had collapsed. He said, "I am a bit different from ordinary cultivators. Even if my great Tao is gone, there won't be any fatal consequences. Eldest senior apprentice brother, there is no need to worry." He paused and then asked, "How is Peach Girl?" The eldest senior apprentice brother said, "Junior apprentice brother, don't worry. After reading the letter you left me, I promptly took action. Junior apprentice sister's condition has stabilized for now." Qin Yu relaxed. This was the fundamental reason he had hurried back to the Peach Garden. He had to first determine that there was nothing wrong with Peach Girl. Thinking for a moment, he said, "Eldest senior apprentice brother, I will soon leave the Peach Garden. There will be some risks on this trip, so I can only leave Peach Girl to you for now. But, senior apprentice brother, don't worry. Once I return, I will naturally replace you." The eldest senior apprentice brother smiled. "Honorable master's graciousness to me is as heavy as a mountain. It is only natural for me to look after junior apprentice sister." Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "Thank you, eldest senior apprentice brother." At the cost of damaging his own great Tao, he had extended Peach Girl's life. The reason the yard master had done this was because Peach Girl was his beloved daughter. Qin Yu had done this in order to save his Tao companion. He couldn't allow Peach Girl to die. In comparison, the eldest senior apprentice brother's current performance could be said to be of noble character and unquestionable integrity. After all, for a Permitha true saint, the great Tao was the foundation of everything. He couldn't allow it to be damaged in the slightest. Not everyone could make such a decision. Qin Yu nodded to Bai Feng and then turned to leave. Time was of the essence. After confirming that Peach Girl was safe, he couldn't delay any longer. As Bai Feng watched him leave, her face filled with disbelief. Eldest senior apprentice brother is little junior apprentice brother saying that his great Tao no longer exists. Although she had heard it clearly, she still couldn't help but gulp as she repeated it. She felt that this world was far too absurd. The eldest senior apprentice brother coughed. Little junior apprentice brother has a great secret that is different from us. There is no need for junior apprentice brother to be too shocked. He waved his hand and left. The corners of Bai Feng's lips twitched, and she revealed a stupefied expression. Even his great Tao had collapsed, and yet he was still alive and kicking. If this wasn't shocking, then was there anything else in this world that needed to be shocked? But at this time, Bai Feng didn't see that the eldest senior apprentice brother who had turned around also had a rueful expression on his face. Qin Yu returned to the small courtyard. With a few words, he drove away Lei Xiaoyu, who had rushed over. As she pouted in dissatisfaction, he slammed the courtyard door shut. Great furnace. With a loud shout, Qin Yu sat down cross-legged and entered into a state of cultivation. Or, to be more precise, what he was doing now was adjusting his own strength and cooperating with the great furnace to reform his great Tao. The void trembled. The phantom of the great furnace appeared, covering Qin Yu within. In the blink of an eye, 5 days passed. Within the training room, Qin Yu opened his eyes. He had spent far more time than he had imagined. After asking the great furnace, he confirmed his suspicions. As he thought, when it came to breaking down and building up, the difficulty had increased. This was the same for Qin Yu. In simpler terms, although it was extremely smooth when he first formed his great Tao, if he broke it once and tried to reform it again, the difficulty would rise by another level, and so on and so forth. Every time the great Tao broke, the difficulty of reforming it would rise. Of course, correspondingly, the quality and strength of the reformed great Tao would also increase. This could be considered a consolation. But Qin Yu was still a bit disappointed. He could only reluctantly suppress the thought of using the Tao-shattering sword as a normal method of attack. It seemed that it was best to do something like breaking one's great Tao as little as possible. If one day it broke and he couldn't reform it again, that would be a big joke. Of course, the more important reason was that as he reformed his great Tao many times, the quality and strength of his great Tao would constantly increase, and his connection with Qin Yu would become increasingly close. In other words, Qin Yu would have to pay an even greater price to break his Tao in the future. In the end, he might even end up like an ordinary true saint. His great Tao would collapse and he would perish. But in the end, this was a matter for the future. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the tumbling thoughts in his heart. The injuries within his body were all caused by the collapse of his great Tao. Now that it had been tempered and reformed, all the problems were naturally solved. If news of Qin Yu's great Tao collapsing and then reforming it in a short 5 days, perhaps all the true saints in the world would instantly turn into rabbit eyes. Leaving the small courtyard, Qin Yu didn't hesitate at all. He lifted his hand and pulled, summoning the Peach Garden's transmission gate. He reached out and pushed it open, then stepped into it. With a slight buzz, the portal disappeared without a trace. Soon, the transmission gate reappeared. When Qin Yu pushed it open, he had already returned to the small world where the Heavenly Sword sect was. The powerful aura released by the transmission gate had already alarmed them. At this time, Countless cultivators in the sword sect widened their eyes, their faces filled with awe and unease. Back then the Dark World only wanted to use the Heavenly Sword sect as a raft to lure Chinyu out, so they didn't slaughter him. Or perhaps they wanted to take this chance to subdue him to make up for their losses. In short, although there was bloodshed, there weren't many. When the Peach Garden's transmission gate descended, Ling Xiao, who was talking to the sword sect master, suddenly changed his expression. Mr. Ninth is here. Not daring to delay, he stood up and stepped out. His figure appeared in midair, and he bowed to Chinyu. Greetings, Mr. Ninth. Xian, paper flew out from somewhere, and bowed as well. Chinyu nodded. His eyes swept over the Heavenly Sword sect. I will be leaving soon. You don't need to worry about me. Saying this, he closed his eyes and began to lock onto the aura of the Eye of Eternal Night. As mentioned before, Chinyu was someone who had comprehended light and darkness as one. It wasn't difficult for him to identify auras. At this time, Chinyu suddenly thought of something. With the level of the Eye of Eternal Night, did it really not sense light and darkness as one? Even if it didn't know, as an existence that had once followed the ruler, it must have heard of it or been warned. From this point of view, the matter of the Eye of Eternal Night being swallowed by the ruler of darkness might not have been so simple. It was likely that this had been part of its plan from the very beginning. After all, attacking from inside the enemy's body was much simpler than attacking from the outside. TSK. The Eye of Eternal Night was truly sinister and bold. After all, if it was swallowed into its belly, it could easily die. Chinyu's thoughts wandered. It wasn't that he had the leisure to think about such things at this time. It was because he couldn't help but feel a bit nervous in his heart. Well, to be honest, Chinyu was indeed very nervous. After all, he was about to enter the world of darkness. And the world of darkness was the ruler of darkness's home field. What if he was playing tricks and still had a card up his sleeve? If Chinyu went in now, he would be sending himself to his death with no chance of coming out alive. But now that things had come to this, there was no way to retreat. Otherwise, if the ruler of darkness recovered, he would die without a doubt. Chinyu took a deep breath and suppressed his tumbling thoughts. His eyes brightened. Found it. The aura left behind by the Eye of Eternal Night immediately reacted after being touched. In front of Chinyu, a black vortex suddenly appeared. It was incomparably dark, as if it connected to an endless abyss. Chinyu clenched his teeth and stepped in. His figure and the vortex disappeared at the same time. This scene fell into the eyes of Ling Xiao and Shenji. After personally experiencing that heaven-shaking battle several days ago, the two of them could certainly guess what Chinyu was doing. As they glanced at each other, they could feel the tumultuous emotions surging in each other's hearts. Mr. Ninth was truly a peak character in this world. Even when facing the tyrannical ruler of darkness, he still dared to think of exterminating him. And most importantly, in just a few days, Mr. Ninth's aura had returned to its peak and was even stronger than before. Such methods were naturally worthy of admiration and praise. If Ling Xiao and Shenji, who worshipped Mr. Ninth in their hearts, were to know that the incomparably majestic peach garden Mr. Ninth in their eyes had been panic-stricken just a moment ago, they would likely be left dumbfounded. Schwa, space flashed, and the half-saint Heavenly Sword sect master appeared. As he looked at the direction where the black vortex disappeared, he revealed a look of gratitude and respect. This is the peach garden, Mr. Ninth? Ling Xiao nodded. Reporting to sect master, it is indeed Mr. Ninth. The sword master revealed a look of praise. He smiled and said, he really is a first-class character in this world. Just the appearance of a divine dragon causes one to yearn for him. He paused for a moment and said, unfortunately, Mr. Ninth came and left in a hurry and couldn't thank him in person. But when I looked at that black vortex just now, it seemed ominous. Mr. Ninth is going to... He looked at Ling Xiao, a puzzled look on his face. Ling Xiao hesitated for a moment. He thought that this matter wasn't much of a secret, and since Mr. Ninth had appeared in front of everyone, he shouldn't be afraid of others finding out. He let out a light breath and lowered his voice. I told Sect Master before that the ruler of darkness was defeated and escaped. Today, Mr. Ninth should be descending into the world of darkness. The Sword Master's eyes widened and the praise on his face froze. With the Heavenly Sword Sect's background, he certainly knew a little about the existence of the world of darkness. Towards the mysterious and incomparably powerful ruler of darkness, he felt a deep awe in his heart. To be able to wound him and force him back was already an unbelievable feat. So how could he dare to break into his lair and cut the weeds by the roots? It had to be known that the ruler of darkness resided in the world of darkness and had a comprehensive increase in strength attribute. If Qin Yu were to be defeated and lose his life, wouldn't their Heavenly Sword sect soon be finished? Chapter 1441. Ling Xiao glanced at the paper and saw that she was looking elsewhere, as if she didn't see the sovereign's expression. His heart relaxed a little and he lightly coughed. Sovereign, you don't need to worry. What kind of character is Miss Ninth? Her every move is naturally prepared. Nothing will happen. The Sword Master came back to his senses and immediately nodded. That's right. I've been worrying too much. His face returned to calmness, and a smile reappeared on his face, but the worry in his heart was still there. After all, this was the world of darkness, and the one Qin Yu wanted to kill was the incomparably powerful ruler of darkness. Xian Ji lightly smiled as he bowed. Senior Sword Master, Senior Brother Ling Xiao, the affairs of the Sword Sect are basically on the right track now. I still have some matters that I need to report to Master, so I won't stay here for long. Farewell. After saying that, she bowed to the two of them and turned to leave, a hint of disdain at the corner of her mouth. She thought that the Heavenly Sword Sect's Swordmaster's eyesight was too poor. It was no wonder that after all these years he was still stuck at the half-saint level, unable to advance. So what if it was the ruler of darkness? Even if it was the real juggernaut, Miss Ninth might not necessarily be a match for him. Since Mr. Ninth had made a move today, that dark ruler likely didn't have much time left, that's right. Xianji had full confidence in Qin Yu. Even Qin Yu didn't know that he now had an incomparably loyal and fanatical fan. Disregarding this side, the Sword Master's smile had already collapsed. He had a dignified expression as he pulled on Ling Xiao. With a bitter smile, he began to discuss the migration of the sect. On the other side, Qin Yu stepped into the black vortex. After a relatively stable transmission, he smoothly arrived in the dark world. The first thought that came to his mind was that this place really lived up to its name. It was truly pitch black, and everything was shrouded by the endless curtain of night. Fortunately, the Tao of Darkness was within the scope of Qin Yu's abilities, so he didn't feel too uncomfortable. A gust of wind blew across the plains, swirling up tiny grains of sand. These grains of sand collided with one's body and fell back down, emitting a soft walal sound. This was an extremely normal occurrence. As a plain without any vegetation, it was only natural for the wind to sweep up mud and dust. But at this time, Qin Yu frowned. He reached out a hand in front of him and caught the grains of sand that smashed into him. He gently twirled his fingers, and a look of surprise appeared in his eyes, as if he could sense something else from these tiny grains of sand. The world of darkness is really unusual. Qin Yu sighed and let go of the sand between his fingers. Then he stepped forward and turned his back to the wind. A gust of wind blew from behind him, causing his robe to flutter in the wind. He gave off a carefree aura, as if he was an immortal who was riding the wind. Coupled with his current appearance and the somewhat otherworldly aura that naturally emanated from his body after the condensation of the great Tao, he was truly extraordinary. Unfortunately, in this dark world, there wasn't a single ghost to be seen. Naturally, there was no qualified audience that could properly serve as a foil to Qin Yu's current elegance. The reason he didn't determine the direction and hurried on his way was because the wind and the grains of sand that were swept up had already given him the answer. As he moved forwards, there was only the sound of the wind. A steady stream of sand was swept up from the ground. A portion of it didn't fly too far before falling back down. As for the other portion, it was lifted up by the wind and flew into the pitch-black sky. It was constantly pushed by the endless wind as it flew deep into the plains. As Qin Yu moved forwards, he inevitably experienced the warm baptism of the falling grains of sand above his head. He had no choice but to summon a mass of darkness aura to isolate it outside. Otherwise, before he reached his destination, he would turn into a clay man. In all fairness, at such a critical moment, and with a great battle about to occur, wasting any strength at all was extremely stupid. But the grains of sand here weren't ordinary. Qin Yu had to admit that he didn't have the good fortune to enjoy them. If he were to be covered by them, he feared he really would turn into a clay man that would shatter at the slightest touch. He continued forwards and forwards. A long time had already passed. The plains beneath his feet were astonishingly large, but Qin Yu still didn't have any intention of flying. Besides this, there was one more thing. He had already been here for some time, but he hadn't encountered anyone along the way. The world of darkness wasn't a danger zone. Rather, it was the frontmost fortress of the western wilderness. By all reasoning, there should be many powerhouses gathered here. Since the Dark Ruler had escaped, with his status, he could easily gather a group of cultivators. While he might not be able to stop Qin Yu, he could at least form several defensive lines to slow down his advance and consume as much of his strength as possible in order to increase his chances of survival. But there was nothing. It was abnormally quiet. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. After several breaths of time, he slowly composed himself. It had already been said before that with the situation having reached this step, the only choice was to completely crush the Dark Ruler and have him receive his bento box. So, even if there was something strange about this place, Qin Yu could only continue forwards. Moreover, the Eye of Eternal Night was still in front of him. If Qin Yu didn't go, wouldn't that be the same as selling it? He couldn't see his own fingers in front of him, but that didn't mean he couldn't see anything. On the contrary, because he had grasped the path of darkness, everything here was within the range of Qin Yu's perception. So, when that ring-shaped mountain appeared on the distant horizon, Qin Yu immediately discovered it. Then he saw the clean and tidy hall that was surrounded by it. The grains of sand that fell from the sky all fell onto the ring-shaped mountain, becoming a part of it, but not a single grain touched the hall. There seemed to be an invisible barrier between the two sides, separating them. Qin Yu let out a breath, but he didn't relax at all. Without a doubt, this was where his goal was. So, if the Dark Ruler wanted to do something, this would be his final chance. Did he really not do anything? Or could it be said that the Eye of Eternal Night had chased him here and suppressed him to the point where he couldn't make any more arrangements? But in truth, Qin Yu didn't favor either of these possibilities. This was because the other party was the Dark Ruler, the highest ruler of this world. In this place, he was a formidable existence, comparable to the vast Sun Ruler. After letting out a breath, in order to maintain balance, he naturally had to take another. This wasn't nonsense, but continued the progression of the story. This was because the moment Qin Yu took a deep breath, an icy chill suddenly appeared, spreading outwards like a tide. The extreme cold aura seemed to come from an ancient cave of ice, but also as if it came from the nine hells. It instantly froze his flesh and blood, extending towards his soul. Qin Yu's consciousness blurred for a moment. The cry of a sword rang out in his ears, clear and bright, cold and sharp, instantly cutting apart this stagnation. Qin Yu's blurred consciousness instantly awakened. He stuffily coughed, and the heart in his chest violently beat. With loud, cracking sounds, the layer of ice covering his body cracked apart and fell to the ground. His eyes turned cold, and a thick killing intent erupted, surging like a tide. But deep in his heart, he was filled with alarm and anger. Just a moment ago, his mind had been tense, and he was in a state of extreme vigilance. But Who would have thought that a single breath of air would cause such terrifying consequences? If it weren't for the sword of the East Sea attacking just now, using its invisible sword intent to cut apart the ice that imprisoned Qin Yu's soul, then he feared he would have been tricked and turned into an ice sculpture. Perhaps he wouldn't have been killed so easily, but the consequences wouldn't have been pleasant. The darkness ruler's methods were truly sharp and terrifying. If he didn't move, then he wouldn't move. But if he did move, then he would take his life. And it was clear that this was only the beginning. Because as Qin Yu struggled free from the extreme cold, the ground in front of him began to break apart. It didn't crack or collapse, but rather it was being torn apart from the inside out. Then, from these holes, a massive number of figures drilled out. Massive wasn't an exaggeration at all. This was because there were far, far too many people. There was no end to them at a glance. And to be more precise, this wasn't too appropriate either. This was because all of these figures that drilled out from the ground in front of Qin Yu were already corpses. Each and every one of them had pale skin and crimson eyes. There was also a black fog that lingered around them like burning flames. These were puppets. They had been refined with the power of darkness and had become mindless killing tools. Whether or not they were strong depended on the strength of the refiner as well as the puppet's own cultivation. With the darkness ruler's formidable strength and his formidable cultivation in the path of darkness, the level at which he refined these puppets could be imagined. But of these puppets in front of him, although there were some with tyrannical auras, most of them weren't anything special. At the very least, in Qin Yu's eyes, they were at most at the level of cannon fodder. If they rushed at him like a hive of bees, they would only be able to slow him down a little and consume some of his strength. These words seemed a bit familiar. Qin Yu frowned. A trace of loathing and coldness flashed in his eyes. He had already realized why he hadn't seen a single living person on the way here. He swept his eyes around. If he wasn't mistaken, they should all be here. This darkness ruler, in order to increase his chances of survival, his heart was quite vicious. Although it was understandable for ants to do anything in order to ensure their own survival, in Qin Yu's eyes, this was still a bit excessive. At the very least, it exceeded Qin Yu's bottom line. So, his eyes turned even colder and his killing intent thickened. Roar! With a loud roar, a dark puppet rushed forwards like a bolt of lightning. Its speed was astonishing and its aura was terrifying. Qin Yu's eyebrows arched up, a dignified look in his eyes. This puppet was actually a saint when it was alive. That's right, it wasn't a half-saint struggling in the sea of bitterness, but a giant existence that had reached the other shore and successfully condensed its own great Tao. Although Qin Yu had personally witnessed just how tyrannical the darkness ruler was, he still found it hard to believe that he could actually refine a true saint into a puppet of darkness. This was a puppet of darkness. After all, in Qin Yu's opinion, even a darkness ruler would find it difficult to accomplish this, to the point where a true saint wouldn't even have the chance to commit suicide. Although he couldn't figure it out, he still had to do it. Qin Yu stepped forwards and lifted a hand. Where his fingertip fell, a speck of light appeared. Then, like a great sun leaping out from the vast sea, it released a radiant light. This light was like an arrow that was pulled taut like a full moon as it shot out, piercing into the eyes of all the dark puppets. Some of the weaker dark puppets were struck by this arrow of light. They cried out miserably, and their bodies seemed to boil over, billowing black smoke rising from them. Then their bodies began to rapidly decay, turning into broken bones and flesh that fell to the ground. They were actually killed on the spot. The true saint-level dark puppet that rushed towards Qin Yu bore the brunt of the arrow of light's killing power. With a stuffy cough, the surface of its body began to burn. But soon, light broke out from the flames, condensing into a suit of armor of light that covered its entire body. Qin Yu revealed a look of surprise. The scene in front of him was beyond his expectations. It caused him to have an even higher opinion of the darkness ruler's level and abilities. disregarding whether or not his character was ruthless in terms of the fusion of light and darkness. This darkness ruler had truly reached the peak of perfection. It was even possible that he was stronger than a darkness ruler, and Qin Yu was naturally unable to compare with him. This was because the dark puppet in front of him walked the path of light and was a tyrannical character that had become a true saint. To use the light ruler as a material to refine a dark puppet, and to even harmonize the two strengths, just this point alone was admirable. Moreover, the dark puppet in front of him clearly wasn't limited to just this. The fusion of light and darkness within its body was pushing against each other, causing its strength to become even stronger. Qin Yu frowned. He drew back a finger, clenched his fingers into a fist, and punched forwards. Dong! There was a deep and dull sound, as if his fist had struck an invisible wall. Ripples immediately spread outwards. These ripples didn't seem strong, but they contained an astonishing, imprisoning strength. It was like a thick and viscous swamp vortex. After capturing its prey, it would begin to bind it in layers, locking it in. The true saint-level dark puppet angrily roared. A wild strength erupted from its body. Black lines began to appear on the surface of the armor of light. The power of light and darkness activated. The imprisoning strength that came from the shaking space was forcefully broken apart. But Qin Yu's expression remained calm. In the end, an inanimate object was still an inanimate object. Even though this true saint-level dark puppet possessed formidable strength, it didn't know how to advance or retreat, so it wasn't difficult to deal with it. For instance, although it seemed as if it had broken through Qin Yu's imprisonment, this tyrannical and ruthless method would cause considerable damage to itself because of the powerful shock waves. As a result, a series of cracks suddenly appeared on the surface of the armor covering the dark puppet's body, accompanied by a series of light cracking sounds. And these cracks were what Qin Yu needed. No matter how solid an existence was, as long as it was damaged, there would be a chance for it to be destroyed from the inside. He lifted a hand and pointed forwards. But this time, light surged on Qin Yu's fingertip. This was black and white weaving together, giving off an extremely mystical feeling. The place where his fingertip fell was the true saint-level dark puppet. The armor on its body had broken apart, meaning that a flaw had appeared in the harmonious coexistence of light and darkness, and it was no longer able to circulate freely. This gave Qin Yu a chance. He had already mentioned the drawbacks of inanimate objects before, so he wouldn't repeat them here. Moreover, he didn't want to use this to destroy the true saint-level dark puppet in front of him. All he wanted to do was slightly shake the balance of light and darkness within its body and cause an explosion from the inside out. This wasn't difficult at all. The rapidly rushing true saint-level dark puppet suddenly staggered. There was a dull, thumping sound from its chest, like a thunderclap exploding on the ground. Kacha! Kacha! More cracks spread out from its chest in all directions, covering the entire upper body of its armor of light. This formidable dark puppet's formidable defensive capabilities had now weakened to the extreme. Qin Yu could continue attacking, using the same method to weaken it further. But there was no more time. He wouldn't give this dark puppet a chance to approach him. This was because Qin Yu was worried that with the cruel and merciless nature of the darkness ruler, he would order the puppet to self-destruct in order to survive. This was a true saint-level dark puppet that was in a coexistence state of light and darkness. If it really did self-destruct near him, Qin Yu wouldn't be able to escape unscathed. When it was time to attack, he would attack. Qin Yu let out a deep breath. As he stepped forwards, he punched out. Chapter 1442. Defensive Strike. There was only a single core purpose to it. That was to mobilize all strength that could be used, gather it into a single point, and then explode at that point. So, without a doubt, this fist was the strongest killing power that Qin Yu could muster at this moment. His current strength was comparable to an extreme, true saint, and with the support of his inherited supernatural abilities, The might of his fist could be imagined. The true saint-level dark puppet across from him was indeed formidable. But its armor of light was broken again and again in front of Chinyu, reducing its defense to its lowest point. Naturally, there was no way for it to withstand this punch that carried with it an infinite and terrifying strength. With a heaven-shaking explosion, the dark puppet was sent flying away. The armor of light covering its body cracked apart and scattered everywhere. And at the same time, the dark puppet's body beneath it was also damaged. It was like a rampaging rhinoceros had smashed into its body. Then it tumbled about and shattered. A true saint-level dark puppet, one that was supported by both light and darkness, was brutally destroyed by Chinyu's unstoppable methods. Although it was, as he said, the main reason was that the other party was an inanimate object that didn't know how to adapt, who could ignore the terrifying strength that Chinyu had erupted with in this matter. But at this time, Chinyu didn't relax at all after killing this true saint-level dark puppet. Instead, his eyebrows furrowed even tighter, and a dignified look appeared in his eyes. The reason was simple. As the puppet was killed, black energy surged out from its body, disappearing in the blink of an eye. But disappearing didn't mean that it had dissipated. Rather, it was absorbed into the bodies of the countless dark puppets in front of him. And as this occurred, the aura that the dark puppets emitted was clearly much stronger than before. This was what caused Chinyu to frown. His complexion was ugly, and a foreboding premonition rose in his heart. For the sake of verifying this inference, he raised his hand and swung his fist, and it was still a defensive technique. However, the dark puppet before him was far from being able to compare to the puppet he'd killed earlier, so it could only howl in despair before it was shattered into pieces by Chun-Chi's fist that smashed down without restraint. But Chinyu's complexion became even uglier. This was because the scene in front of him had already verified his previous guess. What he saw was a sea of torn limbs and flesh, and the black energy that came out was all absorbed by the other dark puppets. This was like a passive monster-killing game. No matter how many dark puppets Chinyu killed, the total amount of their strength didn't change. The only difference was that their strength had shifted from the dead to the living dark puppets. In other words, the more dark puppets Chinyu killed, the stronger the remaining ones would become. In fact, if there were only one or two left, their strength would probably be even stronger than the true Saint Realm dark puppet that he had just destroyed. The chief sovereign of darkness' ability to refine puppets was even more profound than he had imagined. He actually had this hidden attribute. Even if Chinyu could rely on his tyrannical strength to exploit the flaws of this group of dead puppets and finally kill them all, just how long would that take? And to what extent would his own strength be consumed? Just thinking about it, one could tell that this path might be possible, but it definitely couldn't be taken. Otherwise, regardless of whether Chinyu passed through or not, the Dark Ruler's plan would have succeeded. But if he didn't take this path, what could he do? Chinyu felt a great headache coming on. His thoughts raced, and he suddenly had an idea. In the end, the dark puppets were dead objects, and since they were dead objects, there should be a way for a professional to deal with them. Although Chinyu had the blood jade coffin and also obtained a ghost path cultivation method, he couldn't even be considered a beginner, much less a professional. Thus, this wasn't referring to him. He flipped his hand and took out the blood jade coffin. Although Chinyu couldn't control this ghost path treasure as he wished right now, it wasn't difficult to make use of it. In the following matters, he would need to borrow its strength. With a wave of his hand, two figures flew out. They were the departed souls of Saint Zhou and Saint Lin that Chinyu had personally killed not too long ago. After they were sucked into the blood jade coffin, their minds had been erased. But they could instinctively sense the great enmity between them and Chinyu. Now that they had obtained their freedom, they roared out loud. Their eyes turned blood red, and they leapt forwards, wanting to drag Chinyu down with them. Humph! With a cold sneer, Chinyu gripped the blood jade coffin in his hands. The two saint souls cried out miserably and immediately fell to the ground. Their crimson eyes revealed fear and awe. He had killed them when they were still alive, much less now that they were just two trivial souls. Qin Yu didn't feel any fear at all. He lifted a hand and pointed. Open the gate to the kingdom's destruction. Although they didn't have any intelligence, as the masters of the blood jade coffin, the two saint souls could still understand Qin Yu's orders. They flipped over and simultaneously reached out. With a deep roar, they seemed to grasp something and slowly pulled outwards. Rumble, rumble. A low, rumbling sound reverberated in the void. A large, grayish-white door appeared and was slowly being pulled open by the souls of the two saints. Who is it that dares to disturb the slumber of the great monarch of the kingdom's destruction? As the price, I will leave behind your lowly and weak souls. The cold and dignified voice suddenly stopped here. It finally saw the person who had opened the gate to the kingdom's destruction. Not too much time had passed, so it was naturally impossible to forget. Thus, at this time, the solemn monarch of the kingdom, a formidable existence comparable to a true saint, suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Then he shivered. Qin Yu didn't have any expression. He went straight to the point. Your Excellency, the ruler of a perished nation, I took the liberty to disturb you today because I would like to ask for your help in taking away these puppets. I hope that you can help me. Although he said he was asking for help, his tone didn't seem like he was asking for help at all. On the contrary, that icy threat seemed to flow between the lines, as if it would spill out at any moment. The monarch of the kingdom coughed. As the ruler of a world, he had his own pride and dignity. As he heard this, he nearly flipped out. But in the end, he only coughed and didn't say anything else. There was nothing he could do about it. In the end, what the world looked at was strength. And in the past, Qin Yu had blocked the gate to the kingdom's destruction so that it couldn't close. Now that he thought about it, the monarch of the kingdom still felt fear in his heart and his divine sense trembled. If he wanted to help, then so be it. Perhaps he could take advantage of this opportunity to form some relations with Peach Garden's Qin Yu. This could be considered an additional harvest. The monarch of the kingdom could only comfort himself like this and find a way out of this embarrassing situation. He lightly coughed and was about to agree when his voice caught in his throat. This place is, he had been shocked by Qin Yu and feared the thing in his hand, so he hadn't discovered anything strange. But now that he regained his composure, he naturally recognized what it was. The world of darkness. His body shivered. The monarch of the kingdom wasn't willing to say anything else. Qin Yu frowned. He coldly said, "What? You aren't willing to help me?" The monarch of the kingdom that had been forced to climb up a wall and was surrounded by blazing thorns all around him wanted to cry at this time. Qin Yu didn't dare to offend him, especially since he had obtained a treasure of the ghost path and also had two saint spectre souls. He could open the gate to the kingdom's destruction at any moment. But this was even more of a favor that he didn't dare to help. Where was this? Behind the dark world was the western desolation. That was a true giant. He was just a tiny monarch of a kingdom. If he were to offend them, all that awaited him was death. Your Excellency Qin Yu, it isn't that I don't want to help, but that the dark world has a deep background. I don't dare to offend them. The monarch of the kingdom no longer cared about face. He bitterly smiled, his voice full of bitterness. He only felt that the life of a ghost was just too difficult. Qin Yu's eyebrows arched up. A cold light flashed in his eyes. You might be afraid of those people from the western desolation, but aren't you afraid of me? If you offend them, then you'll be pursued in the future. But if I'm not satisfied, then do you believe that I won't slaughter my way into your kingdom and teach you a lesson first? Just as he was preparing to forcefully force the monarch to bow his head, he heard a breath of air blow into his ear. Then that extremely gentle voice said, "If he doesn't dare to do anything, then why don't you ask me to help you?" At this moment, the monarch of the perished nation seemed to feel something extremely terrifying. He no longer cared about Qin Yu's face. With a flick of his sleeve, he forcefully pushed back the two saint souls and closed the gates of the perished nation with a bang. That was not the end. Gray chains appeared, wrapping around the gate of the perished country in the blink of an eye, sealing it completely. They also cut off all the aura fluctuations between the dark world and the perished country. Kacha! Kacha! With a light cracking sound, cracks appeared on the gates that were wrapped in gray chains. Then they shattered and dissipated. Qin Yu frowned, and his pupils shrank. He turned to the side. A pair of beautiful eyes appeared, smiling as they looked at him. Seeing him look over, the eyes blinked and a voice sounded out in his ear. "Hey, this is our first official meeting, so let's say hello." Qin Yu's lips twitched. He knew that the one who had scared the monarch of a kingdom so badly that he nearly pissed his pants and didn't hesitate to pay any price to destroy the gates of his kingdom was this person in front of him. A mysterious existence hidden in space-time. Didn't the stone tower say that the thing that these mysterious and strange existences liked to do the most was to sign contracts with living beings all over the world? Why was the one in front of him so free? It felt like he had always been there, silently watching Qin Yu's actions. This feeling of being taken care of. Well, to be honest, it was really uncomfortable. Instead, it was a little creepy. However, since the other party had already come, Qin Yu could only suppress the fear in his heart and say in a deep voice, "Mysterious existence hidden in space-time, I didn't summon you." This had to be made clear. Otherwise, if he started the contract again in a daze, he might be schemed against. The other party's eyes revealed a trace of dissatisfaction. Although he couldn't see his appearance, it subconsciously made people think of a blurry but cute face that was wrinkling its small nose. This monarch of a kingdom is too rude. He ran so fast and looked like he had seen a ghost. He obviously forgot that he was an evil spirit. Damn it. When I see him in the future, I will definitely teach him a lesson. The pair of eyes looked at Qin Yu and sighed softly. "So I really am not some scourge. You don't have to be so afraid." Qin Yu didn't say a word. He just stared at him. A trace of grievance appeared in the eyes, and his voice also became aggrieved. Okay. I admit that you didn't summon me. I ran here on my own. I originally just wanted to ask you for some travel expenses. After all, it's so far away and it's not easy for me to descend. I didn't expect you to be so stingy." Even Qin Yu couldn't help but feel his heart soften when he heard this performance. Then he felt a great sense of awe. These existences hidden in space-time were really strange and terrifying. He was clearly vigilant and afraid, but his mind was almost bewitched. With a cold face, Qin Yu cupped his hands together expressionlessly. "Since there is nothing else, please go back. I will solve the problem here on my own." The eyes on the other side blinked, revealing a smug look. His mood changed so quickly that he almost sprained his waist. "Qin Yu, are you sure you can solve it on your own? Let me tell you, these puppets aren't easy to kill. Moreover, there is something happening in that hall that I can't see clearly. If you continue to delay like this, I fear the consequences won't be good." Qin Yu's complexion changed, and a gloomy look appeared in his eyes. He looked at the eyes on the other side and took a deep breath. He said in a low voice, "Mysterious existence hidden in space-time, I hope to make a deal with you. I would like to ask you to help me clean up these puppets. What kind of price do I need to pay?" Being decisive and decisive could be considered one of Qin Yu's most dazzling strengths. Of course, the fundamental reason he made this decision was because his intuition told him that this mysterious existence wasn't lying. Pah! Without hands, it was unknown how he snapped his fingers, but the smile in his eyes brightened. "I knew you were a smart person. Handing these puppets to me is just a small matter." After a pause, he continued, "As for the price, I haven't thought about it yet. I can temporarily write it down for you." Qin Yu shook his head. "To make a deal with a mysterious existence like you, it's best to make it clear." After thinking for a moment, he said in a low voice, I will sacrifice a powerful soul to you as soon as possible as the price for asking you to help." His voice seemed indifferent as he said, casually, "Sure. You can do as you see fit. I'm not too anxious." Qin Yu sneered inwardly. He thought, "Like hell, I'll believe you. I was almost tricked in the past." This time, he estimated that it would take another month. He had to remember it firmly and not forget it. At this time, the stone tower's faint voice sounded. "Master, this time you only have half a month's time." Qin Yu was enraged when he heard this. He almost revealed a strange expression. He gritted his teeth and roared in his heart. "Can this time be changed at will? This time it's half a month. Next time, he will directly give me a day. What do you want me to do?" The stone tower coughed awkwardly. "That's not necessarily the case. There is always a line for unilateral changes." "Ah, I didn't think that the time limit in the contract could be played with words. I fear that the origin of this existence is far more fierce than I thought. Master, you must be careful. You absolutely cannot violate the contract." Qin Yu was so angry that he wanted to grab it and smash it into the ground. "You bastard! Why didn't you say anything at the beginning? Now you're playing with hindsight." The stone tower had clearly expected that Qin Yu would erupt in anger. After speaking, it shrank back and put on a turtle face. This clearly wasn't the time to pursue responsibility. Qin Yu could only forcefully suppress his anger. He looked at the puzzled and somewhat immature eyes across from him. He felt that this other party was truly sinister and cunning to the extreme. Chapter 1443. "Qin Yu, what's wrong?" A gentle and sweet voice sounded out, revealing a bit of concern that warmed his heart. But at this time, Qin Yu naturally couldn't feel any warmth. On the contrary, he only felt a growing headache and dread. He coughed and said, "I'm just curious as to why you would pay extra attention to me. In the end, this doesn't match your status." The pair of eyes blinked. "Is that so?" "Actually, the reason is very simple. I will pay extra attention to those who are more interesting and have a better smell. I don't want them to get bullied or get into some other accidents. That would make my heart ache." Qin Yu sneered inwardly. "Like hell, I'll believe you." But then he suddenly thought of something. Why did she say that he smelled better? These words always made one think of the kitchen and then the delicious food in the pots and bowls. Hiss! It was truly terrifying to think about. As Qin Yu suppressed this thought and decided not to think about it any further, the pair of beautiful eyes blinked again. She smiled and said, "If, and I'm saying if, you are willing to give me that very, very bad tower in your hand, then our contract can be ended." "No, shut up." Two voices sounded out at almost the same time. The one who objected was the stone tower that no longer looked like a turtle. It was anxious and panicked. The one who scolded was the pair of narrowed eyes. Indeed, this world always favored beautiful things. Even if these eyes were sinister and squeezed together, they still gave off a very beautiful feeling. But at this time, how could Qin Yu care about appreciating them? Beads of sweat appeared on his back and his body stiffened. He never thought that this person in front of him would be able to sense the existence of the stone tower. Her beautiful eyes revealed a trace of pitiful pleading. All right, just give it to me. I can even promise to help you one more time. Think about how easy it was for me to defeat the Eye of Darkness back then. This is already a very sincere offer." Qin Yu took a deep breath and extinguished the comical softness in his heart. He said in a low voice, "I refuse." The beautiful eyes were misty, making one feel as if they would cry at any moment. "How could you be so heartless? I can still continue to raise the price." Before she finished, she was interrupted by Qin Yu. "There is no need to mention this again. I will naturally offer my soul to you at the appointed time." "All right." Her large eyes became filled with resentment, as if she were a young wife that had been bullied. "I'm not as heartless as you. What I said before remains the same. I'm not in a hurry for this soul. You can do what you need to do first, and then sacrifice it later. This time, Qin Yu didn't sneer. This was because he had grasped an extremely crucial piece of information from these words. Although this existence hidden in space-time could sense the aura of the stone pagoda, it couldn't detect their communication. Otherwise, he would have known that his sinister and cunning face had already been seen through by Qin Yu, and he wouldn't have said anything more. His expression remained gloomy, but he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Otherwise, it would be far too horrifying if even his thoughts were spied on. Since the contract has been formed, please hurry up and make your move. I'm in a hurry. Qin Yu gestured with his hand. All right. As if sensing that Qin Yu didn't have the intention to say more, the pair of beautiful eyes simply agreed and looked at the dark puppets that were rushing over. He didn't do anything, but his eyes seemed to become brighter. Then, under his gaze, the bodies of the dark puppets collapsed and scattered like quicksand. In the blink of an eye, they were destroyed. Endless black gas surged out, but it couldn't find a host, because at the same moment, these dark puppets of different strengths were all destroyed. Qin Yu slightly widened his eyes. He was more and more afraid of the means of this mysterious existence. The turbulent black gas seemed to have sensed some danger. It whizzed back to the ring-shaped mountain, wanting to return to the hull. But at this moment, the sound of inhaling suddenly sounded. All the black gas suddenly froze, and the next moment, like 100 rivers flowing back to the river, whizzed back. Qin Yu's eyes fell and saw that under the pair of beautiful eyes, there was now a small red mouth. At this moment, it was slightly opened, revealing white teeth, and a small canine tooth was mixed in it, which looked particularly cute. But seeing this cute little mouth swallow up all the black gas in the blink of an eye, Qin Yu really couldn't think more. He only felt how terrible this mouth was. Burp, a not too loud burp. The pair of beautiful eyes showed a bit of shyness, and hurriedly closed her mouth and disappeared. I didn't eat anything. I ate too much at once. Sorry for making a fool of myself. After saying that, he paused and seriously explained, These puppet essences are obtained after I killed them. They are not part of the total deal between you and me. You have to understand this. Qin Yu pretended to be calm and nodded. Okay. Terrible. Too terrible. The more he came into contact with them, the more he found that the stone tower and the eye of eternal night were right. These mysterious and strange existences hidden in time and space were indeed very difficult to provoke. And now he had obviously been taken care of by this person. Thinking of this, Qin Yu's heart became increasingly gloomy. He felt that beneath the seemingly beautiful eyes of this person, there was a naked desire to devour him. If he wasn't mistaken, this person should want to eat him up in a single gulp. After all, he had already admitted that he tasted good. His scalp was a little numb. Looking at this pair of affectionate eyes, he felt even more uncomfortable. Qin Yu coughed lightly and cupped his hands. Thank you for your help. I will complete the sacrifice as soon as possible. He had to be fast. Even if he had to kill the innocent, he absolutely couldn't give this person in front of him the slightest possibility of endangering him. In addition, there was another meaning in the words. The transaction is completed. You should go do what you need to do. Hurry up and leave. Although he was fine for the time being, Qin Yu always felt a chill on his back when he was looked at by this pair of eyes, and his whole body didn't feel too strong. I said, there's no hurry. You're just too paranoid. Isn't it tiring to live like this? The pretty eyes said bitterly. Clearly, she realized the deeper meaning behind Qin Yu's words. Who had the time to think about whether or not he was tired? The most important thing was to continue living. If I was too suspicious, I would have already been eaten by you. As his thoughts raced, Qin Yu didn't respond. He pretended to be confused. Humph. If you want to leave, then leave. But listen well. As someone I like very much, I won't allow anyone to harm you. So, if you need me, you must remember to summon me. My abilities are great, and I can help you no matter what situation you are in. This tone was truly boundlessly arrogant. Qin Yu nodded, not taking it to heart. He only thought that this person was bragging about his status. Omnipotent? Haha. Not even a ruler would dare to say such words. After waiting for several breaths of time, there was no movement. Qin Yu looked up and relaxed. The beautiful eyes that had been staring at him had already disappeared. Did they leave? The stone tower hesitated for a long time. Did they leave? This question and answer were all nonsense. Qin Yu rubbed his temples. He felt his head swell up and he nearly vomited blood from anger. What use do I have for this stone tower? It's useful, it's really useful. Master, don't be impulsive. The stone tower spoke quickly, afraid that Qin Yu would be angered and agree to the transaction just now. Qin Yu clenched his teeth. Shut up. He took a deep breath. He looked up at the ring-shaped mountain in front of him and then at the hall. Then he strode forwards. The dark ruler was here, and without a doubt, the Eye of Eternal Night was also here. Although he didn't know why it was in such a strange and silent state, as he thought of what that person had just said, he felt a sense of urgency. Soon, Qin Yu arrived at the base of the ring-shaped mountain. This mountain stretched out in a circle, surrounding the entire hall. There was no gap at all. So, if he wanted to enter, he had to either climb over the mountain or forcefully open up a path on the mountain. Between the two choices, climbing over the mountain was certainly easier. But Qin Yu only looked up and saw the pitch-black curtain of the sky above him, as well as the falling grains of sand. He immediately gave up on the idea of flying up. If he couldn't climb over the mountain, then he could only open up a path. But it was clear that this wasn't an easy matter. Qin Yu looked at the mountain of sand in front of him. His eyebrows furrowed together, uncertainty in his eyes. Perhaps it wanted to make up for its mistakes and increase its importance in Qin Yu's heart. But the stone pagoda hurriedly said, Master, there is no need to be anxious. I don't think it will be so troublesome to pass through this mountain. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. If you have something to say, just say it. His attitude wasn't good, but the stone pagoda relaxed. As long as there was communication, it was fine. If he didn't say anything, then it would be truly troublesome. Master, please wait a moment. Let me confirm it. It will be very quick. It will only take a few breaths of time. This time he wasn't wrong. In just a few breaths of time, the stone pagoda said, It really is like this. Master, please look. This ring-shaped mountain in front of you is essentially a prison. Its goal is to trap and seal up a certain existence within it. If I'm not wrong, then it should be the dark ruler within this hall. After all, if the Western wilderness wants to control this powerful character that is comparable to a true saint, they will need to use some methods. These words were reasonable. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. You are saying that as long as I transform into the aura of the dark ruler, I can be let in on my own initiative. The stone pagoda's flattery was loud and clear. Master is wise. That is exactly what I was thinking. Qin Yu frowned and thought for several breaths of time. Then he let out a breath. He might as well give it a try. As for how to come out after entering, that was clearly a difficult problem. But he could worry about that later. The most important thing right now was to hammer the dark ruler to death and not give him a chance to turn things around. With a thought, the pre-celestial spiritual strength within his body surged. Qin Yu's appearance didn't change, but his aura suddenly darkened. It was deep and obscure like an abyss, giving off a feeling of endless terror. The ring-shaped mountain in front of him trembled. Its surface instantly opened up and countless cracks appeared. They were like terrifying maws, but also like a taut bowstring that could erupt with a terrifying attack at any moment. A thick and cruel aura locked onto Qin Yu. But there was a bit of hesitation in this locking. It was clear that the ring-shaped mountain was a bit confused. The dark ruler was clearly in the hall. This couldn't be wrong. So, why did another dark ruler suddenly jump out from outside? As the ring-shaped mountain was at a loss as to what to do next, Qin made a choice for it. He walked straight towards the ring-shaped mountain. Although his expression was calm, his heart was tense. He was prepared to attack at any moment. After all, he didn't have much confidence in what would happen next. Luckily, nothing unexpected occurred. Sensing Qin Yu's approach, the ring-shaped mountain hesitated for a moment before it began to shake and squirm. The solid mountain turned into some kind of soft liquid substance, allowing Qin Yu to walk in and pass through the mountain step by step. With a single step, he left the ring-shaped mountain of sand. Qin Yu subconsciously let out a breath. He felt as if he had taken a trip to the gates of hell just now. This description wasn't an exaggeration. Qin Yu had already realized that the sand that formed the ring-shaped mountain wasn't simple at all. It contained a terrifying strength within. When he passed through the mountain just now, the mountain had become soft like water and didn't seem dangerous at all. But if it were to instantly solidify and freeze over, Qin Yu feared his fate would be miserable. Luckily, that sort of horrifying thing didn't happen. As Qin Yu let out a breath of relief and looked towards the hall, a resentful voice suddenly sounded out. How could you not take care of yourself? What if something had happened just now? This voice hissed. Qin Yu fiercely turned around. Sure enough, he saw those beautiful eyes appear once more. Had this person already left, or was he hiding in the shadows? If he couldn't even distinguish this, then what use did he have for the stone pagoda? The beautiful eyes blinked. If you think it's useless, you can give it to me. As long as you agree, I can help you settle all the troubles today. The price was raised again. The stone pagoda held, Master, don't. The beautiful eyes narrowed. You're quite intelligent and disobedient. I like this sort of rebellious personality, so I like you even more. After a pause, she said, Qin Yu, the conditions just now remain the same. Give it to me, and I can help you 2 more times for free in the future. Listen well, this is 2 times already. This is my bottom line. You must know when to stop and not be too greedy. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't tempted. As long as he nodded, the dark ruler would be a dead man. Moreover, he could complete the contract and there wouldn't be any more troubles. Moreover, there would be 2 more free chances. With the strength of this mysterious existence, this was the same as Qin Yu having 2 more lives. Temptation, temptation. Qin Yu subconsciously licked his lips. The stone pagoda paled and shivered, as if it could already see its own tragic fate. But the following words left it stunned for a moment, and tears nearly filled its eyes. Qin Yu coldly said, I said that there is no need to mention this matter again. The stone pagoda is not on the transaction list. Even if you increase the price by 10 times, I will still refuse. His words were resolute and decisive, as if there was no room for negotiation. But, in truth, if this mysterious existence really increased the price by 10 times, cough cough, then that really might be the case. So, people always said things more beautifully than they did. This was a common problem. The stone pagoda was moved. It thought, Master, oh Master, I already knew that you were a loyal and righteous person. Don't worry. I will be loyal and do my best in the future. I won't let you regret the choice you made today. Of course, if it knew of Qin Yu's true thoughts at this time, it would likely grit its teeth and curse him for being hypocritical and heartless. Luckily, the beautiful eyes didn't give Qin Yu a chance to ruin its image. It sighed in disappointment. If that's the case, then forget it. Although this stone pagoda is fun, it isn't worth the price. As it spoke, it seemed to sense Qin Yu's true thoughts. Without waiting for him to sweat, it changed the topic. But the strength that appeared in your body just now was quite interesting. If you want... Qin Yu coldly interrupted it once more. I'm sorry, it isn't on the transaction list either. After a pause, his voice became even colder. And this time, it wasn't me who summoned you, but you once again appeared on your own initiative. The beautiful eyes blinked. I know. You really are cautious and stingy enough." Its reply was careless, but Qin Yu had already obtained some information. His heart chilled, and he became even more vigilant. As he thought, it hadn't left at all. It had been hiding in the shadows. This was because Qin Yu had used the word appear and not descend. The difference in a single word was a completely different concept. What was it waiting for? Or what was its goal? Qin Yu suddenly discovered that today's matters had become complicated because of the arrival of this mysterious existence. Could it be that it was certain that Qin Yu would make another transaction with it? Thinking of this, he felt even more uneasy. Chapter 1444. If the mysterious existence hidden in space-time decided not to leave and insisted on playing a shameless game, there was nothing Qin Yu could do about it. In the end, this was all about strength. Since there was no way around it, he could only endure it. The only thing worth celebrating was that Qin Yu had noticed this long ago and was able to make preparations early so that he wouldn't panic when things came to a head. Of course, strictly speaking, this was only a bit of comfort for himself. This was because he still didn't know what the other party's goal was. This was something that made one feel nervous and crazy just thinking about it. He glanced at the beautiful blinking eyes in front of him. Qin Yu resisted the urge to punch him and smash his fist into his face. "Qin Yu, you don't need to be too touched. I am always so warm to the people I like. Don't worry, I will be behind you. If you can't handle it, you can call me at any time. I will definitely handle everything for you beautifully without any mistakes." This was making things clear. Qin Yu clenched his teeth. "Touched your ass." But being angry was useless. Since he had decided to endure it, there was no need to delay. Qin Yu took a deep breath and calmed his mind. He coldly looked at him and then walked out of the hall. He didn't even need to stretch out his hand to push the door open. It was completely empty inside, without any obstruction. It was clear that as long as Qin Yu wanted to, he could directly enter with a single step. The previous dark puppets seemed easy to deal with, but the truth was that if Qin Yu hadn't made a deal with the existence hidden in space-time, wanting to completely exterminate these puppets would have been an incomparably difficult matter. Even if he could force his way through, it would have taken a great deal of time. When he sealed off the ring-shaped mountain in the second trial, he had used his own ability to change his aura to smoothly pass. Looking at this world, the only one who could use the power of a pre-celestial spirit to disguise themselves was probably Qin Yu. Thus, compared to the first trial, the dark puppets, the difficulty of this matter was actually much higher. Thus, at this moment, as he stood in front of the hall and watched the door quietly open, Qin Yu couldn't help but frown. Isn't it a little too smooth? Without a doubt, this hall should be the same as the ring-shaped mountain in that it existed to imprison the darkness ruler. Qin Yu's current aura was similar to that of the Dark Sovereign. It was indeed possible for him to be approved and directly enter, but he didn't know why, but he kept feeling that something was wrong. As he stared at the wide open doors of the temple, unease began to weave in his heart, becoming increasingly thick. Qin Yu had already said that time was of the essence, so he couldn't stay here for too long. Since he was unsure of what was going on in the hall, the best thing he could do was to ask the people in the hall. And the Eye of Eternal Night was right here, standing outside the palace with its doors wide open. Although it wasn't obvious, Qin Yu could still clearly lock onto its aura. "Eye of Eternal Night, may I enter the main hall?" A low voice came out of his mouth and spread into the main hall, echoing continuously in the emptiness. Time passed, and his voice gradually faded away. But he didn't receive any response at all. Qin Yu's frown deepened, and a sharp light exploded in his eyes. "Qin Yu, I'll give you a piece of news for free. This hall is very dangerous. I suggest that you don't go in." A gentle and amiable voice, filled with concern, sounded out in his mind. "If you are injured, I will be very distressed. Why don't you leave this matter to me? I can take care of it in minutes." Qin Yu's face was dark and gloomy. He didn't say a single word, simply ignoring the voice's intentions. His eyes slowly swept around the hall, and he suddenly lifted a hand and punched out. A wild and cold aura of darkness poured into the hall through the open doors, causing the void to shake. Since this hall existed to imprison the ruler of darkness, it would definitely have to react to the attack. Yes, this was a bit risky, but it was better than entering the hall in a completely ignorant state. Reality proved that Qin Yu's judgment was correct. As the aura of darkness swept out, the hall began to tremble. Runes began to appear on the surface of the hall, one that wasn't tainted by a speck of dust, releasing a formidable suppressive strength. With a stuffy cough, a figure appeared in the hall. It was the Dark Sovereign who had escaped. At this moment, his empty lower half had been completely restored. However, if one looked closely, they would discover that it was somewhat illusory. There seemed to be roiling clouds within it, and veins were slowly condensing. Seeing this, Qin Yu's heart chilled. As he thought, the Dark Sovereign wasn't easy to kill. In a short period of time, he had stabilized his injuries and had begun to restore his damaged, mortal body. If he was given more time, he feared the Dark Sovereign would have been able to completely restore himself. But, from the way the Eye of Eternal Night attacked, it should have had a high chance of success. So, why had its injuries been so easily resolved? Qin Yu's pupils shrank. He noticed that the Dark Sovereign was wearing a crown on his head. This crown was pitch black, nearly blending into the surrounding darkness. If it weren't for Qin Yu's careful observation and the fact that he had also comprehended the Tao of Darkness, he likely wouldn't have discovered its existence. This crown was extremely luxurious. It gave off an ancient and dignified feeling, as if it were the crown of a true emperor. And now, between the eyebrows of this crown, there was a black bead embedded, nearly fusing into it. The Eye of Eternal Night. This fellow had clearly been chasing the fleeing Dark Sovereign. So how had he ended up in such a state? No wonder there hadn't been any movement before. He had been thoroughly suppressed. And the reason the Dark Sovereign was able to quickly recover from his injuries was inevitably related to suppressing the Eye of Eternal Night. There was a high chance that it had stolen its strength. As he thought about how the Eye of Eternal Night had swallowed the Dark Sovereign's lower half and a great deal of his flesh and blood, he was almost certain of this. The situation instantly worsened. Qin Yu frowned, his eyes dignified. Originally, he had joined forces with the Eye of Eternal Night to beat the Dark Sovereign to death. But now, the Dark Sovereign had come ashore and his helper had become prey. Qin Yu's first thought was to hurry and leave the world of darkness. From the fact that the Dark Sovereign hadn't done anything before, he knew that he was under a powerful restriction in this hall. But this thought only appeared for a moment before he suppressed it. First, it was easy to enter the ring-shaped mountain, but difficult to leave. Qin Yu didn't have much confidence he could leave. And second, once the Dark Sovereign swallowed the Eye of Eternal Night, his strength could be expected to rise dramatically. He might even be able to make up for his flaws and become a tyrannical existence comparable to a ruler. At that time, Qin Yu would be in deep trouble. The Dark Sovereign had suffered such a great loss and was now being chased all the way to his lair. How could he possibly endure this? In any case, Qin Yu felt that he absolutely couldn't endure this. It wasn't hard to guess what the Dark Sovereign would do once he gained power. Qin Yu took a deep breath and clenched his teeth. His thoughts stirred, about to summon the sun and moon phantoms and ask the Dark Sovereign to help. The reason was certainly sufficient. The Eye of Eternal Night was once your subordinate, and I was powerless to save it. I couldn't just watch helplessly as it perished. In addition, the Eye of Eternal Night was someone you arranged to help me smoothly enter the desolate region. But because of his incompetence, you have to take responsibility for this situation. That's right, that was it. As his thoughts turned to this point, Qin Yu's heart settled. But at this time, a faint voice suddenly sounded out. Qin Yu, are you sure you want to summon that beautiful big sister behind you here? That's right. She is strong and strong enough to help you settle the trouble in front of you. But don't forget what kind of place this is. That beautiful big sister might not want to expose herself to the eyes of the Western Desolate. Qin Yu was startled. He glanced at the pair of eyes floating beside him. He was surprised that they seemed to know a great deal. Moreover, what they said seemed to be reasonable. Although they hadn't truly interacted much, he could faintly feel that this woman didn't want to have anything to do with the Western Desolate. And right now, she seemed to be preparing something. If he ruined her plans because of him, he felt that the consequences wouldn't be good. He raised his hands and slowly lowered them. Summoning the Dark Sovereign to descend didn't seem like a good choice. Then what should he do? As Qin Yu's thoughts raced, the Dark Sovereign appeared in the hall. He chuckled and slowly said, "Mr. Ninth is smarter than I imagined. You were actually able to use such a method to force me to reveal myself." After a pause, his voice became a bit more cheerful. "But what a pity the Eye of Eternal Night isn't as cautious as you are. So, it can only end up being recklessly plundered by me." He lifted a hand and pointed at the black crown on his head, at the bead that had fused together with it. "Eating random things is an extremely stupid behavior. I have already paid the price for my recklessness. But I never thought that the Eye of Eternal Night wouldn't be able to learn any lessons from this." Qin Yu was startled. The meaning behind these words was that when the Eye of Eternal Night swallowed his flesh and blood, the Dark Sovereign had already begun to make arrangements. And it was because of this that the Eye of Eternal Night ended up being suppressed and plundered. If this was really the case, then the Dark Sovereign's thoughts and schemes were truly sinister and terrifying. And Qin Yu's intuition told him that this was likely the case. The Dark Sovereign saw Qin Yu's cloudy expression and didn't seem to have any intention of speaking. He chuckled and continued to speak in a voice as gentle as the night. "Why don't you come in?" Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. "If I don't want to enter, then I naturally won't." The Dark Sovereign nodded. "Your intuition towards danger is quite sharp. I originally wanted to draw you in and use you to escape, but what a pity I ended up leaving nothing behind." His tone was a bit rueful and a bit disappointed. He didn't hide his true thoughts at all. Qin Yu's complexion changed. He thought about how he smoothly passed through the crater and then looked at the silent hall in front of him. Anger appeared in his eyes, and he finally realized why he had felt so restless just now. His current aura was the same as the Dark Sovereign's. In other words, for this imprisoning hall, suppressing any one of them wouldn't make a difference. Once Qin Yu entered the hall, the Dark Sovereign would naturally have a chance to escape, and Qin Yu would replace him as the scapegoat. But why did he say it out loud? Chapter 1445. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. He glanced at the smiling and indifferent Dark Ruler. The other party seemed calm and composed, as if everything was under his control. But it was the same question from before. Why did he say all of this? Did he only want to see Qin Yu be caught in a dilemma? Or perhaps he wanted to see Qin Yu feel uneasy. He always felt that with the Dark Ruler's level, will, and shrewdness, he shouldn't have done such a straightforward and obvious thing. Was there a problem here? Since he had locked onto the suspicious points, he could slowly analyze them, and he would surely obtain some harvests. The greatest possibility that the Dark Ruler had pointed out the current situation was to increase the psychological pressure on Qin Yu. When one was under great pressure, they would naturally become impulsive and irritable, unable to think rationally. In particular, in this sort of situation where one would inevitably be schemed against, he wanted to provoke Qin Yu to enter the hall. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt everything become clear, and all his doubts were explained. From Qin Yu's point of view, if he didn't enter the hall and allowed the Dark Ruler to swallow the Eye of Eternal Night, his wounds would recover and his strength would rise even further. In the end, he wouldn't be able to escape death. On the other hand, if he rushed into the hall and realized the Dark Ruler's scheme, then he would be on guard and there wouldn't be any problems. There was no need to say what choice he should make. A sharp light exploded in Qin Yu's eyes. He stared at the Dark Ruler in the hall, his eyebrows slowly relaxing. "You want to provoke me to go in The dark ruler smiled. Of course, if you come in, then I will be able to escape and avoid a great deal of trouble. He directly admitted this, his tone light and casual, as if he didn't care at all. Qin Yu's lips curved up. I can maintain a calm voice, but something like a heartbeat is difficult to perfectly control. But, as luck would have it, I obtained a divine ability a while ago that focused on the aspect of body refinement. So my 5 senses are rather sharp now. Oh, of course, my 5 senses are naturally much stronger than an ordinary person, so I just happen to be able to smoothly capture it. He took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled, a relieved smile on his face. It seems that the Eye of Eternal Night is more useful than I thought. Although I don't know how you schemed against me, it isn't as if I don't have the strength to fight back, since it can still struggle, and can even make you feel threatened and want to escape. Then I naturally won't go in. The smile on the dark ruler's face faded a little. He stared at Qin Yu for several moments, and then clapped his hands in praise. Peach Blossom Gardens, Mr. Ninth is truly wise. To think that he was able to see through these matters. I truly admire him. But have you ever thought that perhaps this was me deliberately letting you see it, using this as a pretext to stall for time so that you wouldn't barge into the main hall and ruin my plans? Qin Yu shook his head. I must admit that what you say is indeed possible, but there are countless things in this world, and each one is different. Naturally, there are also countless possibilities. It is impossible for me to guess and weigh all of them to see which choice is the best. So, in the end, I can only believe in my own judgment. The chief sovereign of darkness nodded. Then you can wait outside. After I devour the Eye of Evernight, I'll come talk to you. His eyes flashed, and he continued. There's something I have to remind you of. Miss Ninth's method of forcing me to show myself just now is enough. If you use it again, I'm afraid you'll be forcefully pulled in even if you don't want to. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Thank you for the reminder. The air was quiet once more. The chief sovereign of darkness closed his eyes, no longer speaking. His slightly illusory lower body began to rapidly reform his meridians. At this speed, it wouldn't be long before he was completely restored. Outside the hall, Qin Yu had no expression. He seemed motionless, but the truth was that it was impossible for him to truly fall into silence. Time was precious. It could be said that every second was a race against time. Although it seemed as if he was speaking nonsense just now, the truth was that Qin Yu was stalling for time. Of course, without accident, the chief sovereign of darkness also had similar thoughts. It was unknown what he wanted to do, but Qin Yu knew exactly what he wanted to do. He was waiting for the stone pagoda to make a judgment. Master, the situation is as the chief sovereign of darkness said. The aura of this hall has already changed. If you continue to attack it, there is a high chance you will be swallowed up and suppressed. As the stone pagoda spoke to hear, it paused for a moment, clearly wanting to continue. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. What time is it? If you have something to say, then hurry up and say it. Stop hesitating. The stone pagoda's voice was a bit strange. Yes, master, but let's first discuss something. Can you not use this word in the future? It sounds wrong. Blue veins popped up on Qin Yu's forehead. Before he could speak, the stone pagoda hurriedly said, according to my observations, if master is forcefully suppressed by this hall, the strength of the seal here will sharply rise. At that time, the chances of the chief sovereign of darkness escaping will be very low. What do you mean? Cough, cough. It means that if master really has no other method, you can try this method. Everyone will be locked in this hall, and then you can slowly find a chance to hammer him. Qin Yu rubbed his temples. Although he was dissatisfied that the stone pagoda was still in the mood to race at this time, he couldn't help but admit that this was an extremely smelly and dog's hit method. But even if it really was a pile of dog's hit, a method was still a method. If he was driven into a corner, he could still give it a try. In the worst-case scenario, Qin Yu could break into the hall and entangle the chief sovereign of darkness for a bit. Even if he couldn't rescue the Eye of Eternal Night, he could still slow down the chief sovereign of darkness's plundering speed and increase the chances of the Eye of Eternal Night counterattacking. But even though he knew it was dog's hit, he still had to endure the stench and use it. He always felt a bit unwilling. Qin Yu couldn't help but glance at those beautiful eyes. He thought that they definitely had many methods to resolve this matter. Another point was that the chief sovereign of darkness clearly didn't sense the existence of these eyes. This seemed like a very ordinary matter. But thinking about it carefully, with the chief sovereign of darkness's level in strength and also in the world of darkness, even if he was heavily wounded and imprisoned, his strength was still incomparably terrifying. Even in such a state, the chief sovereign of darkness didn't even have the qualifications to see those eyes. This was what it truly meant to be horrifying. Qin Yu suddenly felt a bit more dread towards this mysterious existence that seemed very easygoing and easy to talk to. His hands, eyes, and mouth were all beautiful, and he didn't seem to be too terrifying. So the thought of asking him for help only appeared in his mind for a moment before he suppressed it. If he placed a few more bricks on top of it, it would be completely solid. Qin Yu didn't forget that this mysterious existence hidden in space-time had shamelessly insisted on staying here from the very start. If he said that he didn't have any ulterior motives and was only willing to help others, he would rather poke out his own eyes. In short, he couldn't look for him to make a deal, at least not today. Qin Yu took a deep breath. His mind raced, and a thought suddenly flashed in his mind. Thinking about it again, it seemed that it really might work. However, he still had to be cautious. He had to discuss this with the stone tower first. After all, this fellow knew a great deal. Stone Tower, the reason I was able to smoothly pass through the crater and arrive in front of this hall is because my aura imitated that of the chief sovereign of darkness, right? Hearing this, the Stone Tower's first thought was, holy shit, I'm done for. Could it be that because of the current situation, Qin Yu was overthinking things, causing him to go insane? Otherwise, why would he need to ask if he was the one who did it? It was over. In today's situation, he hadn't even truly fought the enemy, and he had already fallen into chaos. How could he possibly survive like this? No, I have to stabilize myself. That trash Qin Yu has been scared out of his wits. I can only rely on myself to turn the tide. What should I do now? That's right. I have to stabilize Qin Yu first. I absolutely can't let him realize that I've been scared silly. Then I have to calm him down bit by bit so that he can regain his calm and think. Only like this can I see a slim chance of survival. With a light cough, the Stone Tower tried to make his voice as gentle as possible. Master is right. You are simply too smart. I know that nothing in this world can be hidden from your eyes. How could a frustrated and dispirited person recover their confidence from panic as soon as possible? Of course, it was unrestrained praise. This was praise for the great technique. Qin Yu frowned. He felt that at this moment, the Stone Tower's behavior was far too strange. But he wasn't in the mood to think about it. He continued to say, my aura is the same as the chief sovereign of darkness, so I smoothly passed through the crater, and this hall in front of me was able to forcefully suck me in and suppress me. Well, I'm saying that if I continued to attack it, right? It was over. How could he praise the great technique for being ineffective? Let alone restoring his sobriety. This was clearly even more serious. He was even beginning to speak incoherently. What to do? I have to stabilize myself, woo, but I can't. I'm really panicking right now. Qin Yu saw that the Stone Tower didn't respond and knew that he couldn't delay any longer. He furrowed his eyebrows and continued to say, if my aura was still that of the chief sovereign of darkness, but I became different, would I be able to change this situation? In other words, the reason I can continue to attack the hall is because it is the key to suppressing the chief sovereign of darkness. That strike just now forced the chief sovereign of darkness to reveal himself is the best evidence. The Stone Tower. Oh, so Qin Yu wasn't crazy. I knew it. During this period of time, he had experienced so many trials and tribulations. There were even more terrifying scenes than today. So how could he suddenly become as timid as a mouse? Cough, cough. Luckily, I was calm before and didn't reveal any fear. Otherwise, I would definitely be mocked by Chinyu in the future, and I wouldn't be able to raise my head again. Cough. I think that what Master says is reasonable. But the key is how to simulate the Chief Sovereign of Darkness and become different from the Chief Sovereign of Darkness. Although I haven't personally entered, I must remind Master that the suppression of this hull isn't simple at all. I fear it is impossible to conceal it with ordinary methods. Qin Yu's lips twitched. Do I need you to remind me of this? What nonsense. If this hull wasn't fierce, how could it suppress the dignified Chief Sovereign of Darkness? This stone tower was acting strangely at this critical moment. Could it be that it had been scared out of its wits by the Chief Sovereign of Darkness? Qin Yu didn't know, but the two of them, master and servant, had different impressions of each other. Cough, cough. The degree of overlap was quite high. But thinking about it, the Chief Sovereign of Darkness in front of him was the strongest existence Qin Yu had ever faced. After all, in the world of darkness, this was an existence comparable to the vast sun ruler. Even if he was injured and imprisoned in his current state, his strength wasn't something a true saint could compare with. If Qin Yu wanted to hammer him, he feared that if he wasn't careful, his head would explode first. Hiss! He hadn't realized this before. Sure enough, carelessness was an unavoidable problem. Cough, cough! This was also the fault of the Chief Sovereign of Darkness. He had made a grand entrance. But in the end, Qin Yu and the Eye of Eternal Night had joined forces and easily hammered away half of his body. He had to drag his broken body and flee in a sorry state. The difficulty level didn't seem to match his status at all. But thinking about it carefully, how many saints in this world would dare to use the Tao-shattering sword technique? To use one's own life as an attack, it would be strange if the power wasn't terrifying. In addition to the powerful Eye of Eternal Night and the incomparably powerful inherited supernatural ability, picking stars, he was able to achieve such an overwhelming victory. If it were anyone else, let alone killing the Chief Sovereign of Darkness and forcing him to flee, they would have been hammered to death on the spot and brought home to be made into popcorn. Cough, cough, caution, caution. He had to be even more cautious. Qin Yu's heart trembled. He took a deep breath and said, "Hidden divinity." The stone tower paused, a hint of hesitation in its voice. Hidden divinity. Veins popped out on Qin Yu's forehead. He was filled with resentment and annoyance once more. What use do I have for this stone tower? Let me tell you, I am here for you to give your opinion. Who needs you to repeat it? Could it be that I can't hear my own words? The stone tower panicked. Originally, it could feel Qin Yu's trust, so it didn't panic too easily. Even if it panicked, it was mostly a pretense so that Qin Yu could obtain more psychological satisfaction and a sense of accomplishment. But now it was different. That mysterious existence hidden in space-time, although it was silent and didn't say a word, it was still glaring at it from the side. The stone tower could feel the interest in those beautiful eyes. Really, you must believe me. Although those eyes were very beautiful, when they locked onto you, it was a very uncomfortable feeling. It felt like it had become a piece of meat on the chopping board. Although it hadn't been thrown into the pot yet, it was only a matter of time before it was eaten. That's right, this was the feeling. The stone tower was gratified by its own ability to express itself, but then it became even sadder, because when it thought of this, the entire stone tower felt even worse. It felt like it was in despair. It had proposed a deal with Qin Yu. Although it had been coldly rejected and left no room for negotiation, the multi-talented stone tower was well aware that there was nothing in this world that was absolutely reliable, especially a man's mouth. If it believed half of it, it would have to pay taxes. Thus, it had to work hard to display its own value. Only the more useful it was, the more likely it was that it would be retained and not abandoned without hesitation as a transaction partner. Master, I've thought about it carefully. There's a chance of success. No matter what, it had to first express its opinion and then worry about the rest. Qin Yu frowned. Really? The stone tower suppressed its panic. Really? Qin Yu lifted a hand and punched out. At the same time, he used the hidden divinity art. The aura of his soul instantly vanished as it escaped into another space. Dong! As the fist fell, the hall violently shook. The stone tower, he attacked just like that? He had already attacked. But I really wasn't thinking about it. I was just going along with your words. Didn't this seem a bit reckless? Qin Yu was expressionless. In truth, before he spoke, he had already made the decision to attack. Obtaining the stone tower's approval was only a bit of psychological comfort. After all, the worst that could happen was being forcefully sucked into the hall and being suppressed. First of all, there were still some bullshit methods that could be used. Second of all, the great Tao that he had just condensed could be broken and sent out again. Third of all, if he really fell into a hopeless situation and couldn't think of anything else, then he could only abandon all scruples and summon the ruler to descend. Of course, Qin Yu wasn't someone who didn't make preparations. He thought that the woman might refuse to descend in order to hide herself. Thus, there was a fourth point. That was the mysterious existence that was floating behind him, looking at him with gentle and soft eyes. Cough, cough. In truth, the stone tower wasn't wrong. A man's mouth was an incomparably mystical existence. If it was believed half of it, it would have to pay taxes. As the saying went, the world changed with time. He couldn't just watch helplessly as he was about to be hammered to death by someone else and stubbornly cling to his old ideas. As long as he could ask him to help, then the ruler of darkness wouldn't be a problem at all. This really wasn't looking down on others without reason. That person was floating right in front of you, but you couldn't even see him. What else could you do with this trash level of skill? Qin Yu had to admit that he was a person who cherished his life. In a situation where it wasn't absolutely necessary, it was best if he didn't risk his life. Thus, combining these 4 points together, this was the key to his brazen attack. Shua! In the hall, the ruler of darkness opened his eyes. His eyes were pitch black like an endless abyss. At this time, his eyes locked onto Qin Yu. The corners of his lips curved up in a mocking smile. You've been fooled. Chapter 1446. He had been trapped in this hall for so many years. Although he hadn't been able to break the seal, after spending so many years together, he had finally gained some understanding of it. It wasn't difficult to make use of it a little. Thus, just now, the chief ruler of darkness had deliberately said those last words to remind Qin Yu of what had forced him out. This was because as long as he attacked again, the dark ruler could stimulate the suppressive strength of the hall and forcefully pull Qin Yu in. In other words, Qin Yu's guess wasn't wrong. The hall trembled. The dark ruler stuffily coughed. The suppressive strength of this place was aimed at him. After being stimulated, the suppressive strength erupted. The first to suffer was, of course, the dark ruler. In exchange for a little suffering, he could pull Qin Yu into the hall. This was a very good deal. But in this world, things didn't always develop according to a person's wishes. This was why there was the word accident. And today, the dark ruler soon discovered that he had suffered an accident. The suppressive strength of the hall had erupted. In normal circumstances, Qin Yu should have been swept up by the wild strength and pulled into the hall. But now he was still standing outside. The suppressive strength of the hall howled past him, causing his robes to flutter up like strong winds. But he was like a strict army that didn't dare offend him. The dark ruler's smile froze. He stubbornly stared at Qin Yu, his eyes as sharp as arrows, as if he wanted to pierce through him. His plan had failed, but why was it like this? After determining that Qin Yu was the main culprit behind Western Wasteland's utter defeat in the Zeroth world, he had begun to prepare his plan. To be able to change one's aura and possess the ability to change into a myriad of forms was Qin Yu's strongest ability. But at the same time, it was also the path to his death. The dark puppets couldn't stop Qin Yu. At the start, the Dark Ruler was well aware of this. After all, he was a character that could destroy Western wastelands' years of hard work. The ring-shaped mountain was to make Qin Yu relax his guard so he could easily rush in. The true killing move was in this hall. As long as Qin Yu stepped in and erupted with strength, no matter how many cards he had, the Dark Ruler was confident he wouldn't even have a chance to use them. Everything proceeded smoothly. According to his plan, Qin Yu had changed his aura and arrived outside the main hall. Then he had received the signal to attack the main hall. This should have been the time to draw in the net and enjoy the harvest of the battle. But things had come to this step, and he was stuck. The greater the expectations, the greater the disappointment. The gloomy-faced chief, Sovereign of Darkness, could be considered a very shrewd and resolute individual, but he was able to force himself not to vomit out a mouthful of blood. It worked. Qin Yu let out a long breath, his heart relaxing. Although there was still 1, 2, 3, 4 options, if he could directly hammer the Dark Ruler to death, then that would be the best result. And now, Qin Yu saw hope. The main hall existed to suppress the God of Darkness. Now that he had suppressed the Eye of Eternal Night, he was wantonly plundering the Eye of Eternal Night's energy to recover from his injuries. Although the Eye of Eternal Night appeared to be in a pitiful state, it clearly had the ability to retaliate. All it needed was an opportunity. What Qin Yu needed to do now was to give it this chance to attack the main hall and constantly stimulate the suppressive strength. As the Dark Ruler was trapped within, he naturally wouldn't feel too good. When he was in pain, the opportunity came. Thinking of this, Qin Yu didn't hesitate at all. He raised his hand and punched out again. The main hall trembled. The runes that appeared on its surface became increasingly bright. After being provoked again and again, it was clear that the Dark Ruler was truly enraged. There was a loud crackling sound as tiny bolts of lightning appeared in the void of the main hall. They howled as they struck down, all of them focused on the chief Sovereign of Darkness. Even with his cultivation, he couldn't help but stuffily cough as his complexion paled. Above his head, on a dignified and luxurious crown, the Eye of Eternal Night that was embedded within it was silent. But a pair of eyes appeared from the deep darkness. They were dim and listless, and there was also a bit of pain in them, but they seemed more indifferent and calm, as well as a ruthless and bloodthirsty killing intent. Seeing this, Qin Yu's heart calmed. Everything he had said before was just a guess, but now that he saw the Eye of Eternal Night awaken, he was able to confirm his guess. It really did have the strength to resist. This was of utmost importance. Otherwise, everything Qin Yu did now would be meaningless. He could either think of a way to escape, or he could summon the Chief Sovereign to descend, or he could make a deal with that pair of eyes behind him and quickly flatten the Chief Sovereign of Darkness. Now that the Eye of Eternal Night had awakened, all Qin Yu needed to do was continue to stimulate the suppressive strength of the main hall and teach the Chief Sovereign of Darkness a good lesson. He needed to have him understand what it meant to be tortured, and what it meant to be torn apart. Bang! Another fist punched out. The runes that appeared on the surface of the main hall doubled in number. With a humming sound, the surrounding space began to twist and fold. Crackle! Crackle! More and more bolts of lightning appeared, becoming increasingly thick. The Chief Sovereign of Darkness's body emitted black smoke, and his hair stood up. His face turned even paler, and his eyes were filled with shock and anger. The Chief Sovereign of Darkness never imagined that things would develop to this point. He originally had a certain chance of victory. Even if he couldn't scheme against Qin Yu in the end, he would at most take some risks. As long as he could refine the Eye of Eternal Night, everything would be settled. But now he was trapped in the main hall, trapped within a cage. He couldn't touch Qin Yu at all. It was like he was suspended in midair and could only passively endure the whipping. It was both sad and angry. And what was even sadder was that the Chief Sovereign of Darkness was well aware that the suppressive strength of this main hall was capable of fatally wounding him. In other words, Even if Chinyu didn't do anything and continued to stimulate the strength of the main hall and increase its suppressive strength, even if the Eye of Eternal Night didn't do anything, he would still be played to death. Just thinking about it left him filled with grief and indignation, so depressed that he nearly vomited blood. For the dignified chief sovereign of darkness to be reduced to such a state in his own lair, this was truly lamentable. But right now, he didn't have time to be sad, nor did he have time to sigh. He had to think of a way to save himself. Sitting here and waiting for death was something that the chief sovereign of darkness couldn't accept. Chinyu. The deep roar was heavy and oppressive. It was no longer as calm as before. Chinyu paused and looked up. The chief sovereign of darkness said in a low voice, "I believe that you joined forces with the Eye of Eternal Night to surround and kill me. There must be some secret behind this. If I tell Western Desolation about this, no matter what you want to do, it will all end in vain. Believe me, even if I am trapped in this main hall, the Eye of Eternal Night won't be able to stop me if I want to send a message. This is a very simple matter." Chinyu let out and punched out again. The main hall was enraged. The lightning in the void was like a whip that came crashing down. The chief sovereign of darkness body twitched. He gnashed his teeth and roared, "Are you really not afraid?" Chinyu shrugged. "So what if I am afraid? The situation has already reached this point. Do you think I can just give up? Holy shit, you have a good reason." The chief sovereign of darkness' mouth twitched. He hurriedly said, "I can swear that as long as you give up today, I won't pursue anything that happened in the past. In fact, I can even help you achieve what you want. Believe me, if the Eye of Eternal Night can help you, I will naturally be able to help you achieve what you want after I devour it. In fact, I can even give you more." His eyes were sincere and his voice was solemn. He stared at Chinyu, waiting for his response. Chinyu fell silent. Just as the chief sovereign of darkness thought that there might be a turning point, he sighed and shook his head. "Your Excellency, chief sovereign of darkness, might be sincere, but I don't dare to believe you. In order to avoid any accidents, I ask that you die earlier." Chinyu, the chief sovereign of darkness, roared out in rage. Endless een and cold energy erupted from him. At this time, he was like an abyss that could swallow all. "With my status and identity, this is already the limit of my patience. Don't push your luck. Don't force me to take a risk." His eyes were pitch black, and every word that came out of his mouth emitted a bone-chilling chill. "Believe me, truly believe me, an existence that can compare to a chief sovereign can't have no cards in their hands. It isn't that I don't have the strength to fight, it's just that I don't want to take too great a risk. But if I didn't have a choice, I would still do so without hesitation. After all, there's still a chance of success if I take a risk. Even if I fail, a glorious struggle is better than dying in humiliation." Chinyu was expressionless, but his heart shrank. His intuition told him that the chief sovereign of darkness wasn't lying, and in truth, this was even more reasonable. How could a powerful character that could make a chief sovereign feel a sense of dread and maintain the existence of the dark world to this day be reduced to such a state where he couldn't even resist? There had to be a card in his hand. But what could Chinyu do? As he said before, with the situation having reached this step, there was no possibility of retreat. As for what the chief sovereign of darkness said about not pursuing the past, Chinyu didn't believe a single word of it. If he didn't die today, Chinyu would surely have troubles in the future. Moreover, there was still the existence of the Eye of Eternal Night. Although it didn't seem valued too much, it was still that woman's subordinate. If he sold it like this, would there be no future troubles? So this was still a dilemma. If he continued to attack, the chief sovereign of darkness wouldn't be willing to wait for death, so he could only give it his all. Once he attacked, it could be imagined that his methods would be heaven-shaking and earth-shattering. Not to mention whether or not he would succeed, the first thing he would do would be to kill Chinyu to vent his anger. After all, at the bottom of it all, it was all because of him. He understood everything and thought of everything. But in this dilemma, he could only choose the lesser option. If the chief sovereign of darkness went all out and used his final trump card, Qin Yu might be able to block it. If there was no other way, he could only call for help. Although it wouldn't be good in the end, it was better than leaving behind a great disaster for himself. So, no matter what, the chief sovereign of darkness had to die today. If he lived, how could Qin Yu feel at ease? Let me think about it. Bang! A fist punched out. The hall shook. Apart from the void bolts of lightning, blue wind blades appeared, howling as they sank into the chief sovereign of darkness' body, leaving behind a seemingly unremarkable trail of blood. Fine! Bang! Another punch. The chief sovereign of darkness roared, Qin Yu! Qin Yu seemed to wake up from a dream. He revealed an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, I was too absorbed in my thoughts just now. It was a completely subconscious action. Then have you thought about it? Bang, a third punch. The words that the chief sovereign of darkness were forcefully cut off. As the void bolts of lightning and wind blades smashed into him, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Ah! With a wild roar, the chief sovereign of darkness lifted a hand and pointed it between his eyebrows. Kacha! There was a light sound, as if something within his body had broken. From the start, he had faintly sensed that Qin Yu wasn't willing to reconcile with him. It was only that he held onto a sliver of hope and endured it until now. If he didn't have to risk his life, then it was best not to do so. Wasn't it better to live a peaceful life? But these 3 punches had shattered the chief sovereign of darkness' final hope. After determining that there was no longer any possibility of reconciliation, he could only take a risk. With this step, all of his years of preparation would be wasted, not to mention the great risks he had to take. But even if he could smoothly escape, he still wouldn't be able to break free from the suppression of the Western wilderness. And if he couldn't break free from the Western wilderness, then to the chief sovereign of darkness, he still wouldn't be free. His countless years of patience and waiting would all come to nothing. Bitterness, unwillingness, anger, all of it turned into hatred towards Qin Yu. If the anger in his eyes could kill, he feared he would have already been burnt to a charred corpse. Qin Yu! The chief sovereign of darkness roared out once more. He fiercely looked up, his face fiercely twisting. His flesh and skin wildly wriggled, and within the festering flesh, a mouth appeared, revealing sharp fangs. It emitted a cruel and destructive roar. The horrifying scene before him didn't end. Rather, it was only the beginning. This was because similar changes were occurring all over his body at nearly the same time. The robes on the chief sovereign of darkness body melted away, turning into a thick black liquid that fused into his flesh and blood. The exposed chief sovereign of darkness had already lost his human form. He had turned into a crazily wriggling mass of flesh and blood. The surface of his body festered, and within every festering area, there was a giant mouth that constantly opened and closed. The roars were filled with madness and chaos, constantly echoing through the hall. After Qin Yu heard them several times, his complexion changed. He coughed and temporarily sealed off his sense of hearing. Even so, he still couldn't completely isolate out these roars. They seemed to be able to penetrate through the body and directly affect the soul, causing one's mind to become restless and agitated, even giving birth to an urge to destroy everything. Although Qin Yu had already guessed that the chief sovereign of darkness trump cards would be terrifying and cruel, he was still shocked by what he saw. The scene in front of him was losing control of the great Tao. At the true saint realm, one could condense the great Tao. This was their greatest reliance, the result of a lifetime of cultivation. But if external factors caused their great Tao to distort and they lost control, this would lead to the current situation. In other words, they would suffer a backlash from the great Tao. They would become a twisted monster that would eventually self-destruct. Although the chief sovereign of darkness had grasped light and darkness as one, he still walked the great Tao of darkness. Now that he suffered a backlash, darkness would erupt and destroy all. Just as Qin Yu was thinking this, the puddle of flesh and blood that the chief sovereign of darkness suddenly erupted. His entire body seemed to become a fountain of flesh and blood. Massive amounts of flesh and blood gushed out, spreading out in all directions like a tide. Wherever it went, everything was covered in flesh and blood, becoming a part of the darkness. This was because the flesh and blood that gushed out was corroded by the source of darkness. It could be seen as the manifestation of the endless abyss. Everything it covered was the abyss. In other words, everything would eventually be swallowed up. And this was the trump card that the chief sovereign of darkness had prepared. He should have waited until he escaped his imprisonment to refine the eye of eternal night and then open it outside the hall. At that time, the hall in front of him would be swallowed up by darkness, becoming the final stepping stone on the path of the chief sovereign of darkness. He would have freed himself from the control of Western Wasteland and truly become a ruler. He would have filled in the vacancy of the vast Yang ruler and grasped the great destiny that existed in the dark. With this, the chief sovereign of darkness even had the chance to leap up and peer into a higher level, perhaps even reaching an unimaginable boundary. Of course, all of this had become nothing now. The fountain of flesh was incomparably fierce, and the firepower was potent. In just several breaths of time, it covered nearly the entire hall. As was said before, the chief sovereign of darkness and this hall had been together for countless years. Although he had been miserably suppressed here, he still had a deep understanding of the other. Even though he had lost consciousness, his instinct to understand was still there. In the shortest period of time, he completed the basic swallowing. A pair of eyes appeared in the festering flesh and blood. Amidst the violence and madness, he still managed to retain a trace of reason. He glared at Qin Yu with incomparable hatred. Chapter 1447. Darkness gushed out from the palace door, condensing into a giant hand that grasped at Qin Yu. As expected, the first thing it wanted to do was kill him to vent its anger. This could barely be considered as having anticipated the enemy. The Eye of Eternal Night didn't move. It was unknown if it had been dealt with by the backlash of the Great Tao or if it was still waiting for an opportunity. In short, the only thing Qin Yu could rely on right now was himself. He sighed inwardly. Luckily, he was already prepared, so he didn't panic. He took a step forwards and clenched his hand. The cry of a sword echoed in his mind. He didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but he could faintly feel a bit of excitement. Thinking about it, this sword of the East Sea had lain dormant in the depths of the sea for countless years. Now that it finally had a chance to display its brilliance in the world, it was naturally excited. This was understandable, but as he thought about the price the sword of the East Sea had to pay for displaying its brilliance, and how the great Tao it had just reformed had been crushed to pieces, Qin Yu felt a bitter taste in his mouth. Looking at this world, there was probably no one besides him who could shatter the great Tao and still be alive and kicking. But this matter, it didn't feel right no matter how he thought about it. It didn't seem to be something worth being proud of. At most, his ability to seek death and not die was first class. Pah! Qin Yu clenched his fingers. Although his mouth was bitter, he didn't hesitate to attack. Otherwise, he could only watch helplessly as he was swallowed up by the darkness. He didn't need to experience that feeling to know it wouldn't be good. As mentioned before, every time Qin Yu's great Tao was shattered and reformed, its quality and strength would rise. In other words, when he shattered his great Tao, he would be able to release an even more formidable strength, making the sword of the East Sea even more powerful. There was something that had to be made clear. The sword of the East Seas' might wasn't limited to this. In the end, Qin Yu's strength wasn't enough. He could only barely activate his great Tao to erupt with a single strike, and that strike was far from perfection. From this point of view, Qin Yu was indeed trash. At this time, Jia Yu's sword fell. The great Tao within his body shattered, and all of its strength was sucked out, pouring into his sword. A wild and destructive strength erupted, instantly piercing through the darkness that rushed out of the palace door. It continued to slash towards those venomous eyes. When a true saint reached the other side of cultivation, he was already at the peak of the world. Even though he wasn't as powerful as a sovereign, a life-risking strike wasn't something that could be easily blocked. Not to mention, it had the support of the sword of the East Sea. As the saying goes, the more you eat, the stronger you become. This simple principle could be applied to it as well. Bang! An earth-shattering explosion erupted from the depths of the main hall, accompanied by countless splatters of rotten flesh and blood. The sword intent wreaked havoc, slashing open countless wounds. It seemed extremely terrifying, almost slicing the darkness ruler into 800 pieces. But in reality, this was not enough to cause any fatal damage to him. When the raging sword light gradually dissipated, the pair of resentful eyes reappeared. Even though it was much dimmer and revealed a trace of weakness, the coldness, ruthlessness, and hatred within it did not dissipate in the slightest. Qin Yu sighed inwardly. Indeed, with his current methods, killing true sages was easy. But when it came to sovereigns or those close to the sovereign's realm, he was still far from being able to do so. The Tao-shattering sword was his most powerful technique, but it could only slow down the Dark Lord slightly and wound him slightly. Since he couldn't kill Qin Yu, then with the hatred in the chief god of darkness's eyes, he would certainly use even crueler and more vicious methods to deal with Qin Yu. Roar! Within the fountain of flesh and blood, the rotting flesh began to rapidly grow on the surface of the flesh. Giant mouths began to open up. At this time, these mouths opened up and emitted ear-piercing howls. It was like countless wooden stakes were ruthlessly stabbing into one's soul. Not only was the pain able to evoke the deepest darkness in one's heart, causing one's temper to rise to the point of insanity. Qin Yu was already in a weakened state after his Tao shattering. He stuffily coughed and blood flowed out from every orifice of his head. His face twitched as he couldn't suppress the pain he felt. Darkness surged out. This time, it wasn't a giant hand, but icy cold and slippery tentacles that howled towards Qin Yu. Although it was fast, there was still some distance between it and Qin Yu. In normal circumstances, it would give him some time to react. But at this time, the tentacles that flew out from the main hall trembled and vanished from sight. When they reappeared, they were right in front of Qin Yu and wrapped around him. As the tentacles touched flesh and blood, there was the sound of corrosion. Then they sank into Qin Yu's flesh, wanting to forcefully pull him into the main hall. Within the rotting flesh, the eyes were filled with hatred and excitement. Although the dark ruler still maintained a trace of lucidity, he was still affected by the backlash of the great Tao. At this time, there was only a single thought in his mind: to kill Qin Yu in the cruelest and most painful way possible. In fact, the reason the Dark Ruler impatiently attacked Qin Yu was to save himself. Only by killing him could he quell the anger and resentment in his heart. Only then would he have a greater chance of remaining clear-headed and surviving the backlash of the great Tao. And now, Qin Yu was about to die. In his current state, since he had been caught, it was impossible for him to struggle free. With a light sigh, Qin Yu revealed a helpless expression. Indeed, a powerhouse that neared the level of a ruler had a dazzling array of methods. He had already been caught, let alone being in a weakened state. Even if he was in perfect condition, he still wouldn't be able to resist it. Being pulled over was absolutely unacceptable. That mountain-sized pile of rotten meat was so disgusting that it made one want to vomit at a glance. If he was eaten by it, the taste would surely be so sour that it would make one flinch. Since he had relied on himself to fight until the end and was still attacked, he could only call for help. There was a moment of hesitation in his mind. Should he summon the Lord Ruler, or should he make a deal with that quiet and beautiful pair of eyes behind him? But in just an instant, Qin Yu made a decision. He would follow his own heart. With a thought, the phantoms of a sun and moon appeared above his head. The reason he was able to summon them so quickly was because he was already prepared. He only needed a single breath of time to complete the summon. As for whether or not that woman would respond, well, unless she could find someone else to help her complete the mission to enter the desolate region, she shouldn't be able to stare blankly on as he died. Puff, puff, there were two light sounds. It was like a balloon that had been inflated to the point of bursting. Although it wasn't loud, it caused Qin Yu's heart to go cold. That woman had simply and neatly refused without hesitation. It couldn't be. She was actually so heartless that she didn't hesitate at all. But soon, Qin Yu discovered that the one who shattered the phantoms of the sun and moon wasn't the Lord Ruler. A faint sigh sounded out in his ears, filled with grief and confusion. Qin Yu, how could you be so stubborn? It would be so easy to ask for my help. As long as you said a single word, none of this would be a problem. But in the end, you wanted to shatter the heavens with your shaft. This is a bad habit. You have to change it. Otherwise, sooner or later, you will suffer a great loss. Qin Yu's first thought was that he was about to be dragged over by a pile of rotten meat and eaten up in a miserable manner. How could he have time to listen to this nonsense? Moreover, what sort of joke was shattering the heavens with my shaft? Moreover, the phantoms of the sun and moon that I created involved the summoning of the Lord Ruler. So how could you destroy them? Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was mysterious existence hidden in space-time. You have destroyed my plan to save myself, causing me to fall into a desperate and dangerous situation. So you must take responsibility for this matter. As Qin Yu hurriedly spoke, he discovered that the black tentacles were still tightly wrapped around his body. His flesh and blood were being corroded, and the speed at which they were pulling him had become incomparably slow. It wasn't that the speed had become slow, but that the time around Qin Yu had been forcefully twisted, slowing down countless times over. Time laws. Even though Qin Yu himself had managed to grasp this ultimate law when he was relatively weak, the number of times he had used the time laws could be counted on one hand. But in fact, the number of times he had used the time law could be counted on one hand. Firstly, the cost was too great, and secondly, its effects were relatively limited. To put it simply, it was useless. If he didn't have to use it, he would naturally use it as little as possible. Without a doubt, this was the first time that Qin Yu had truly experienced just how formidable the time laws were. To instantly distort the flow of time in a small area was the same as placing the enemy and himself in two completely different worlds. If he used this to kill his enemies, wouldn't he be successful in every endeavor? An existence hidden in space-time, a terrifying and mysterious existence that could be referred to as him, truly had a shocking strength. But even this hidden existence that could easily control the time laws and change the flow of time in a small area was left speechless by Qin Yu. It never imagined that at this time, Qin Yu would still dare to play such a skilled and shameless trick. After several breaths of time, he quietly said, Qin Yu, if you have a chance to come into contact with other hidden existences in the future, you absolutely must not hold such an attitude. There really is a chance that you will die. He took a deep breath and turned to look at the hull. Within that lump of rotten flesh, there was a fierce and cruel expression, as well as a bit of hesitation and fear. It was clear that the dark ruler who had lost control had finally sensed something strange around Qin Yu. I will help you deal with this matter. Just consider it an occasional act of kindness. Who told me to like you so much? As soon as he finished speaking, a hand directly bore out from nothingness. It was fair and exquisite to the point that every single finger seemed as if it was meticulously carved out of the finest ivory, and it emitted a faint glow. Just a glance at it caused one to exclaim with admiration from the bottom of one's heart. But this pair of hands, beautiful to the point that they didn't seem to contain the least bit of smoke or fire, as if they didn't belong to the mortal world, gently pointed at the hull. Really, it was just like this, a casual tap, and then everything was over. Within the great hall, Atop that giant mountain of rotten flesh, the eyes of the darkness sovereign suddenly lost all luster. Hatred, violence, excitement, bewilderment, fear, all sorts of emotions vanished, leaving behind only a gray blankness. This was because, as the finger landed, the consciousness that belonged to the ruler of darkness was like a shallow pencil line on a piece of white paper that was wiped clean by an eraser. Not a single trace of it was left. Bang! The dark ruler who had lost consciousness was no longer able to maintain his out-of-control state. Thus, that giant lump of meat in the hall suddenly collapsed and broke apart. It split into countless pieces, each one crazily struggling, desperately trying to reform itself. Horrifying mouths appeared one after another, but they only had time to emit a short and despairing cry before they broke apart and disintegrated. All of this took a long time to describe, but it all happened in a single breath of time. In the blink of an eye, the entire hall fell deathly silent. There was only that pile of rotten flesh that had gone completely limp. Occasionally, there would be some remnant, instinctive reaction that would gently twitch and emit muffled popping sounds. This was a horrifying scene. Even though Qin was experienced and knowledgeable, he still couldn't help but instinctively feel a trace of fear. This fear came from the dead, dark ruler in front of him, and the remaining 70% came from the fear and awe he felt towards him. In this out-of-control state, the dark ruler might not have been fully conscious, but his strength had definitely reached a level that was infinitely close to, or even comparable to, a ruler. However, the dark ruler, who was in such a state, had actually been obliterated by a single finger. If he said he wasn't afraid, then that was absolutely bragging. The beautiful palm vanished from sight. The pair of eyes turned to look at Qin, revealing a faint smile. I already told you that no matter what it is, as long as you ask, I will definitely be able to help you. If I didn't have some ability, how could I dare to say such words? It seems you must have thought I was bragging before. Qin Yu's face stiffened. He naturally didn't dare to admit it. He bowed and said, I thank you for your noble character and unquestionable integrity for helping me out of your obligation. I will remember today's favor, and if there is a chance in the future, I will surely repay you. He spoke these words in earnest, his expression solemn and grateful. But the truth was that he was panicking inwardly. He had confirmed that this person in front of him was nearly omnipotent, and yet he still insisted that today's matter was his obligation to help Hiss. Just thinking about it made Qin feel that his courage wasn't ordinary. But he had no choice but to insist on this matter. Otherwise, for a mysterious existence hidden in space-time to help him kill a powerhouse that was nearly at the level of a ruler, just what sort of price would be appropriate? One didn't need to think with their knees to know that this was a price that Qin couldn't afford. Since he couldn't afford the price, he could only renege on his debt. This was the only way. His eyes flashed, and he quietly said, I just said that I was occasionally being kind, so you don't have to remind me so many times. How come you still don't remember the reminder I gave you? Qin, you need to change your attitude in the future. Not everyone is as easy to talk to as I am. I didn't obtain anything this time, and instead I lost a great deal of strength. What a loss! I have to think of a way to make up for it from somewhere else, so I'll be leaving first. After speaking, this pair of beautiful eyes vanished from sight. Qin had just exhaled halfway when it suddenly drilled out and stared at Qin in an awkward manner. Your strength is unfathomably deep. Being beside you makes me nervous and apprehensive. I lost control of myself for a moment. I hope you don't mind, he quietly said. You have already seen the result of the backlash of the great Tao. So, you must often remind yourself in your heart. The great Tao needs to be taken good care of. He glanced at Qin once more, and then his beautiful eyes vanished. Did he really leave? Qin patiently waited for a long time. After confirming that he had really left, he raised his hand and rubbed his stiff face. At the same time, his mind subconsciously began to recall what this person had just said. Oh, there seemed to be a meaning behind it. Qin Yu subconsciously frowned, and then his fingers stiffened. Could it be that he was reminding him? The great Tao needed to be taken good care of. But Qin Yu honestly didn't know much about it, much less take care of it. In addition to the sword of the East Sea, its power was fierce. If this sword fell, even a ruler would have to temporarily avoid it. But the price of this sword was to shatter his own great Tao. If it was shattered, how could he talk about taking care of it? In particular, with Qin Yu's current state, it was obvious that he had shattered it more than once or twice. If this trend continued, it was possible that he had shattered it 8 or 10 times or even more. In this situation, what would happen to the great Tao? Looking at the ruler of darkness who had turned into a pile of minced meat in the hall, Qin Yu's heart chilled and the hairs on his back stood up. Hiss! He had to pay extra attention to this aspect. He didn't want to fall to such a state one day. As for how to understand and take care of the great Tao, it seemed that he needed to seriously discuss it with his eldest senior brother after returning to the Peach Garden. As a true saint of the Permitha continent through the proper path, he should have some understanding of this aspect. If not, he would go to the East Sea Dragon Palace and find that old dragon to have a good chat. In short, he had to pay attention to it. He took a deep breath and suppressed the tumbling thoughts in his heart. Qin Yu glanced at the place where he had left, and a trace of solemnity appeared in his eyes. This person's actions were becoming more and more unfathomable. He pointed out the hidden dangers in his body and helped him for free. But in this world, how could there be love and hate for no reason? Intuition told Qin Yu that there would definitely be many connections between them in the future. He hoped that he could find the reason as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be hard for his heart to feel at ease. Stepping into the hall, Qin Yu resisted the urge to vomit and began to carefully search. He hadn't forgotten his original intention of killing the ruler of darkness. Moreover, the Eye of Eternal Night was still embedded in the crown. He didn't know if it was still alive. Chapter 1448. There was far too much rotten flesh, and the stench of blood filled the air. Qin Yu looked around for a long time and finally couldn't stand it any longer. He summoned the ever-burning flame and left the hall. Once it was touched, it would burn endlessly. This was the ever-burning flame. The flames rose up. After a moment, they were extinguished. Qin Yu flicked his sleeves, stirring up a great wind that swept away the ashes. In the empty hall, the black crown quietly fell to the ground. Qin Yu looked down and saw the Eye of Eternal Night embedded in the center. Although it was much dimmer, it hadn't broken. Luckily, it seemed its life was tough. First, it was suppressed by the Darkness Chief Sovereign, and then it was plundered. Then it experienced the backlash of the great Tao and still hadn't died. The hall's seal had already been broken. Qin Yu already knew this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to step inside. Now, there was nothing to worry about. He stepped in and bent down to pick up the Darkness Emperor crown. As if sensing Qin Yu's aura, the Eye of Eternal Night flashed with an incomparably dim halo. Then, a pair of eyes slowly appeared. They were dim and lifeless, and they seemed to be at a loss as they looked at Qin Yu. He didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but from this gaze, Qin Yu could feel an incomparably complex emotion. There was hesitation, shock, fear, and disbelief. But soon, before Qin Yu could observe it any further, all of these emotions vanished, as if what he saw just now was just an illusion. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows and said, "Tell me, what happened? You were clearly the one who chased after the Darkness Chief Sovereign. So how did you end up being suppressed?" After a moment of silence, the Eye of Eternal Night's weak consciousness sounded out. "I was careless and fell into the Darkness Chief Sovereign's trap. Thank you for saving me." This was strange. Ever since the Eye of Eternal Night had seen the Lord Ruler's attitude towards Qin Yu, even though he hadn't said anything on the surface, Qin Yu could clearly sense that the Eye of Eternal Night was unconvinced, unbalanced, and faintly hostile towards Qin Yu. For the Eye of Eternal Night to thank him in person was truly unexpected. Qin Yu felt a bit strange. He coughed and said, "It's good that you know. In order to save you this time, I paid a considerable price. You must remember my life-saving graciousness." These words weren't wrong. Qin Yu had even shattered his recently reformed great Tao, so it wasn't an exaggeration to say that he had paid a great price. Cough, cough. The only thing that was slightly awkward was that this self-destruction of the great Tao didn't actually play any decisive role. But regarding this matter, Qin Yu obviously wouldn't admit it. The Eye of Eternal Night sounded a little absent-minded. All right, I'll keep that in mind. Qin Yu was finally able to confirm that there was something wrong with this fellow's condition. Was he affected by the backlash of the great Tao? His heart tightened. The scene of the dark ruler losing control was still vivid in his mind. He didn't want to face it again any time soon. He could sense that the Eye of Eternal Night had weakened a little, but its condition was still stable. Its power showed no signs of going berserk. If nothing went wrong, then he could eliminate the possibility that he was affected by the backlash of the great Tao. Was he frightened? After all, even though Qin Yu had personally experienced what had just happened, compared to the Eye of Eternal Night that had been swallowed by the ruler of darkness, the experience was definitely on a different level. It was not impossible. TSK, you've lived for God knows how many years, but you still don't have much courage. What Qin Yu didn't know was that the Eye of Eternal Night had indeed been frightened by his random thoughts. It was just that the specific reason was different. The true source of the Eye of Eternal Night's fear came from the mysterious existence hidden in space-time. It came from its aura, that aura impossible, absolutely impossible. The Eye of Eternal Night's heart was in a mess. Countless thoughts intertwined and collided. It felt like its entire mind had turned into a rolling paste. It found it hard to believe, but the truth was right in front of it. It had confirmed it many times in its personal experience, just now. Yes, it was the truth. No, I must stay by Qin Yu's side. He clearly had an extraordinary relationship with the existence hidden in space-time. I'll definitely find the answer if I follow him. In short, no matter what, I can't let my master suffer any harm. With this in mind, the Eye of Eternal Night instantly made a decision. With a slight buzz, Qin Yu looked at the Eye of Eternal Night that had completely become one with the Dark Crown. Their auras were fused together, and there was no possibility of them being separated anymore. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. What kind of operation was this? The Eye of Eternal Night said indifferently, "In order to express my gratitude to you, I am willing to give up my freedom and fuse with the Dark Crown. This will make its power even stronger, and it will be enough to ensure that you can perfectly conceal yourself. No one will be able to detect any abnormalities." The words were extremely sincere, and it was reasonable to repay the kindness of saving his life. But for some reason, Qin Yu felt that it was extremely strange. He kept feeling that the Eye of Eternal Night, which had completely fused with the Dark Crown, was staring at his reaction with its eyes wide open. His face stiffened, and he coughed lightly. Actually, you don't have to be so magnanimous." "Oh, so serious. This matter is ultimately to help me," the Eye of Eternal Night said indifferently. "Masters will be carried out. I'm doing this to ensure that no accidents will happen to you in the following matters." Qin Yu already knew that this fellow was loyal to that woman. So when he heard this, although he still felt that it was strange, he could reluctantly accept this matter. TSK, if you're loyal to such a degree, then I think you're the one with the most brains here." Qin Yu coughed lightly, suppressing these thoughts. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Since you have already fused with the Dark Crown, then in the future we might have to spend time together. So, can you retract your gaze a little? I keep feeling like I'm being watched by you." The Eye of Eternal Night paused for a moment. It dryly said, "Sorry, I don't have much experience. I won't do it in the future." Then, the feeling of being watched disappeared. Qin Yu rubbed his eyebrows. Although he still felt that something wasn't right, thinking about it, there didn't seem to be anything bad about this matter. He coughed lightly and got to the point. "How do I use the Dark Crown? The Dark Ruler has died, and the crown has returned to an ownerless state. If you take a drop of blood, you will naturally become its new master. Qin Yu raised an eyebrow. That's it. That's it. It was unknown what the Eye of Eternal Night thought of. It paused for a moment before continuing to explain. In truth, the more precious an object is, the easier it is to recognize a master. This is because the true difficulty lies in the process of obtaining them. The so-called treasures of the heavens and earth belong to those with the ability. Since you can obtain them, then you naturally have the qualifications to become their master. Although this explanation was a bit crude, if one carefully thought about it, it was very reasonable. One could even understand it as the Eye of Eternal Night's flattery. Qin Yu was secretly pleased. To be able to make this arrogant fellow lower his head, he felt a bit of a sense of accomplishment. Even the discomfort of his weak body seemed to lessen a little. Qin Yu's lips curved up. He flicked his finger and a drop of blood flew out, falling onto the dark crown and fusing into it. He closed his eyes and quietly sensed it for a moment. Then he placed the dark crown on his head. With a thought, it vanished from sight. A smile appeared on his face. Qin Yu opened his eyes, filled with joy. The dark crown could indeed further strengthen his ability to change his aura, ensuring that no one could sense his ever-changing appearance. But this wasn't the dark crown's full ability. Or, it was more accurate to say that amongst its many effects, it wasn't too dazzling. Let's put it this way. In the Dark World, the Dark Ruler being able to compare with Ruler Vastyong was half of the credit. But now, the Dark World had clearly become Qin Yu's home field. Let me think a little. In the future, in the Dark World, would Qin Yu be able to fight a ruler? There was probably a bit of a disparity. One had to admit that Qin Yu's strength was a bit lacking compared to the Dark Rulers. But one couldn't forget that Qin Yu was able to reform the Great Tao, and he also had the Sword of the East Sea in his hand, with both of them erupting together. Even a ruler wouldn't be able to gain an advantage in the Dark World. This could be said to be completely unprepared. Had his strength risen yet again? At the very least, in terms of life-saving methods, he now had another powerful card in his hand. Thinking of this, Qin Yu's smile widened. When he heard the Eye of Eternal Night say that it needed to sleep for a period of time to recover, he nodded in agreement. He looked up at the quiet hall in front of him. Perhaps it was because it had been swallowed up by the backlash of the great Tao of darkness before, and now that Qin Yu had become the new master of the Dark Emperor crown, there was actually a strange connection formed between them. Qin Yu had an intuition that he really could swallow and refine this hall. It was a hall, but it was more like the manifestation of some kind of dark strength. After refining it, there would surely be benefits. Should he swallow it or not? Qin Yu's heart stirred. The stone pagoda's voice sounded out. Master, this hall comes from the western wilderness. If you refine it, there might be an accident. It paused for a moment and said, After all, you've only seen 2 cases of people randomly eating things and having a stomach upset. It's best to be a bit more cautious. Qin Yu thought for a moment and felt that this was reasonable. He took a deep breath and suppressed the thought of refining the hall in his heart. In any case, it was already meat in his mouth. It wouldn't be too late to eat it when things were stable in the future. He carefully looked around. After determining that he hadn't missed anything, Qin Yu left the hall. He swept his eyes over the ring-shaped mountain. On the surface, it didn't seem any different from before, but the truth was that a change had already occurred. The ring-shaped mountain and the hall were one. They were both a part of the seal. And now, a subtle connection had formed between Qin Yu and the hall. The result was Qin Yu stepped out. The ring-shaped mountain became soft, like a mass of liquid that he easily passed through. It was almost the same as when he came, but in the end it was different. When Qin Yu transformed into the Dark Ruler's aura, it was the same as being sealed inside. But now, the seal here had opened on its own initiative to send him away. The meaning behind this was completely different. Indeed, it was as he imagined. The Dark Ruler was imprisoned here. The Dark Ruler was controlled by the Western wilderness. the seal that prevented him from being free. But now, Qin Yu could control his strength. It had to be said that different people had different fates. This sort of differential treatment was an incomparably sad matter. Luckily, the Dark Ruler had already died, otherwise he would have been filled with grief. Killing the Dark Ruler had been full of twists and turns, but Qin Yu hadn't truly experienced despair. What he relied on wasn't his own strength, but the thigh that had mysteriously appeared behind him. Unfortunately, Qin Yu still didn't know why that thigh had become his thigh. Moreover, deep in his heart, there was always a faint fear. He was worried that one day the thigh that supported him would stomp him into meat paste. He had to be careful about this. He couldn't be careless. Shaking his head, Qin Yu suppressed his thoughts. He lifted a hand, opened a portal, and stepped out of the world of darkness. Shwa! In the next moment, Qin Yu's figure appeared in a strange small world. This place was desolate and didn't have much life. Within his divine sense, he could only sense a few weak auras. Now, because Qin Yu had suddenly appeared and hadn't restrained his aura, they had been given a fierce fright. Qin Yu was disinclined to observe their reactions. He lifted a hand, and the void trembled. A portal appeared in the peach blossom garden. He pushed it open and stepped inside. Their little junior apprentice brother had left and returned. This trip wasn't long, but what left Bai Feng even more numb was that she discovered that her little junior apprentice brother's great Tao had shattered. Although her eldest senior apprentice brother's expression was still calm, there was a bit of stiffness that couldn't be concealed within this calmness. Eldest senior apprentice brother. Bai Feng hesitated and couldn't help but speak up. But just as he spoke these 3 words, he was interrupted. The eldest senior apprentice brother sighed and smiled. Little junior apprentice brother is an extraordinary individual. He is not someone that you or I can imagine. So, third junior apprentice brother, please don't ask about this matter anymore. Because even if he asked, he wouldn't know how to answer. The true Saint Great Tao was the foundation that crossed the endless sea of bitterness and reached the other shore. It was the key to a saint's cultivation. If one's great Tao collapsed, a saint would perish. But this rule clearly couldn't be applied to their little junior apprentice brother. This was already the 2nd time, and this was only what they had seen with their own eyes. Who knew if this had happened before? After all, when their little junior apprentice brother shattered his great Tao, it wasn't difficult for him to condense it. The last time it happened was 5 days, right? My memory is quite good, so I haven't gone insane. But in a short 5 days, he completely condensed his great Tao, and his strength rose even further. Although this was something they had seen with their own eyes and had happened right in front of them, they still didn't think it was a fantasy. It was hard to believe. Their eldest senior apprentice, brother's footsteps, were steady as he left. But his eyes were unfocused and the corners of his mouth twitched, revealing a bit of confusion. 10 days later, Qin Yu left seclusion. Without any hesitation, he went straight to his eldest senior apprentice brother's residence. Her first words made eldest senior brother, who had just managed to maintain a smile on his face with much difficulty, freeze on the spot. Eldest senior apprentice brother, how can I take care of my great Tao? The eldest senior apprentice brother looked at Qin Yu's face and saw that he was earnestly asking for guidance. His lips couldn't help but twitch. He thought to himself, was such a simple question something someone like you, who had shattered your great Tao and condensed your great Tao, should ask? This time it was 10 days, right? That's right, 10 days. Haha, my memory is really good. It was twice as long as the last time. But thinking about it, compared to the matter of his great Tao shattering and then reforming, what was 5 days? Perhaps his little junior apprentice brother was only trying to make his reformed great Tao stronger and more resilient than before. After all, the strength of his great Tao was astonishing. If he wasn't careful, it would shatter. Sensing it, he found that his little junior apprentice brother's aura was much deeper and more vigorous than before. It was just as he guessed. In other words, if his little junior apprentice brother didn't pursue the quality of his great Tao and only focused on condensing it, he would have left seclusion much earlier. He didn't know why, but he suddenly felt tired. The tired eldest senior apprentice, brother, squeezed out a smile and tried to keep his voice as calm as possible. Little junior apprentice brother, why do you ask about this? Qin, you made some slight changes. He only said that he had coincidentally seen a true saint lose control, so he felt some dread in his heart, and so on. The eldest senior apprentice brother's heart skipped a beat. Just what did his little junior apprentice brother do when he disappeared? Wasn't it common to see a true saint lose control everywhere? If such a thing really did happen, it would surely cause a great calamity. But recently, Vastyong had been relatively peaceful, and there hadn't been any similar news spreading out. Sensing the strange look in the eldest senior apprentice brother's eyes, Qin knew that his excuse had been seen through. He immediately understood the reason and coughed. Eldest senior apprentice brother, there are some secrets involved. It's not convenient for me to tell you right now. The eldest senior apprentice brother waved his hand. I understand. If it's inconvenient for me to say it, then there's no need to say it. He took a deep breath and looked at Qin with a solemn expression. Concerning the great Tao, I have only just completed it, so I'm not too clear on it. But there is something I must warn you about. The great Tao has its own spirituality. You can think of it as a kind of consciousness hidden outside of our understanding. Chapter 1449. Qin, you couldn't completely understand what the elder senior apprentice brother was saying, but there was one thing he was sure of. That was the great Tao had a spirit. Thinking about it, he had broken the great Tao once or twice. Although he could quickly restore it, this sort of feeling of dying and living again and again wasn't a good feeling. How could the spirit of the great Tao not have any thoughts? Since there were precedents of a true saint losing control of the great Tao and suffering a backlash, this proved that the spirit of the great Tao had a temper. At this point, he could basically confirm that the mysterious existence hidden in space-time was reminding Qin, or, to be more precise, it had already sensed that something was wrong with the great Tao within Qin body. Thinking of this, his heart tightened. At this time, if he said anything about not changing his expression, even if a mountain collapsed in front of him, he would definitely be bragging. What nonsense. Qin had personally witnessed the fate of a character, like the Dark Ruler after suffering a backlash from the great Tao. The pile of rotten flesh and blood that filled the hall had been personally incinerated by Qin using the ever-burning flame. He didn't want to face such a tragic and despairing situation in the future. Not even the tiniest possibility. Qin took a deep breath and steadied his mind, doing his best to not reveal anything. He rapped the table and said, Elder senior apprentice brother, the path I walk is the true divinity Tao. Being able to condense the great Tao is an anomaly, so I don't know much about this. Is there anything else you can tell me? The Peach Garden's first disciple was a smart person. Although Qin was calm, he still vaguely grasped some things from his questioning. He furrowed his eyebrows and glanced at Qin. He didn't say anything. If his junior apprentice brother didn't want to say anything, then there must be a reason. At this time, the elder senior apprentice brother suddenly remembered that in a short period of time, Qin had broken 2 great Taos. He suddenly understood where his worries came from. This, indeed, everything in this world came with a price. Even his junior apprentice brother would find it difficult to break free from his shackles. As I said before, I have just reached the great Tao and haven't explored much. I can only tell my junior apprentice brother some of my guesses and experiences. This matter was likely related to Qin safety. The elder senior apprentice brother had a solemn expression as he slowly spoke, trying to make his words as accurate as possible in order to avoid misleading others. First, after a cultivator crosses the sea of suffering, they condense the great Tao and reach the other shore of cultivation. This great Tao is something we have cultivated for our entire lives. But the condensation of the great Tao is not something we can control. Yes, we can only passively accept it. Junior apprentice brother needs to understand the meaning. For example, when I condensed the great Tao, I felt I was powerless. It's like the process of condensing the grand Tao is like a copy, and the object of the copy is the world that we are in. The so-called great Tao of heaven and earth runs through every corner of the world and exists between all things. It's indescribable and uncontrollable. When we cultivate to the true sage level, it's probably an imitation of the great Tao of heaven and earth like a shadow. The senior apprentice brother stood and walked back. He great Tao, he great. He said. But he had he ming, Tao. He. After pausing for a while, eldest senior brother nodded in confirmation. That's right, it's this feeling. Using the great Tao of heaven and earth as the blueprint, we copy it when we achieve Tao. It's equivalent to replicating an incomplete shadow of the great Tao of heaven and earth. Or rather, it's like taking an incomplete shadow of the great Tao of heaven and earth and merging it into our great Tao. That's why it has spirituality. His complexion paled and exhaustion filled his eyes. He looked at Qin Yu apologetically. I haven't been a saint for long, so I only have this shallow understanding. If junior apprentice brother has anything he doesn't understand, you can only rely on yourself to slowly speculate and comprehend it. Everything the elder senior apprentice brother said was indeed difficult to understand. In particular, when it came to the relationship between the great Tao, shadows, and spirituality, it was enough to make an ordinary cultivator feel dizzy and confused. But Qin Yu was different. He had come into contact with the shadow of the abyss, as well as Liao Shi, who had vanished without a trace and might never return. He naturally understood the true meaning behind these words. A shadow in the abyss had developed a consciousness and lived for countless years. It had become an old turtle that had once obeyed his orders. As for Liao Shi, he had been the projection of some formidable existence. He had seemed alive, but in the end he had vanished without a trace. Qin Yu's heart chilled. It was because he already knew that shadows had a spiritual nature that he discovered this matter was far more thorny than he had imagined. Within the true Saint Great Tao, there were shadows of the Great Tao. It was no wonder that once there was a backlash, even someone as formidable as a saint couldn't resist it and could only turn into a horrifying monster and die a miserable death. The stronger one was the more they knew, and the more awe they felt towards this world. A true saint was incomparably powerful, but that was only the result of a lifetime of cultivation. They simulated a shadow of the great Tao and used this to complete a transformation of their life level. A ruler had gone a step further, but from this perspective it was only an increase in the degree of simulating the world. Compared to the great Tao itself, what was a true saint or a ruler? As for the backlash of the great Tao, it was highly likely that the cause came from the spirituality contained within the shadow of the great Tao. Even if it was only a shadow, it was still the shadow of the world. After experiencing the existences of the old turtle and Liao Shi, Qin Yu didn't dare to underestimate them in the least. Even if it was only a shadow, it was still a projection of the world. Perhaps human strength could contend with it, but Qin Yu didn't think he could do so right now. In other words, once the backlash of the great Tao erupted, there was a high chance he wouldn't be able to resist it. His heart chilled and his complexion turned dignified. Across from him, the elder senior apprentice brother hesitated. Since junior apprentice brother has sent something, you should be more cautious in the future. Perhaps if you slowly restore it, there won't be any problems. Qin Yu had long since realized that his elder senior apprentice brother had guessed something. He bitterly smiled. I fear it's a bit too late. He wouldn't remind him for no reason. Since he had already spoken, there was a high chance that something bad had already begun. It was just that Qin Yu hadn't noticed it yet. Before this, he might have had doubts. Could it be that his own great Tao couldn't sense the subtle changes that were occurring? But now that he learned of the existence of the shadow of the world's great Tao, Qin Yu no longer had the confidence to do so. The shadow of the world, who knew what sort of power it possessed? It wasn't impossible for it to conceal all changes, so that a cultivator wouldn't be able to sense anything. The elder senior apprentice brother's complexion changed, revealing an anxious look. Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted by Chinyu. Elder senior apprentice brother, there is no need to worry. There are only some clues, but nothing wrong has occurred yet. The reason I asked you today is because I want to make preparations early so that I won't be caught off guard in the future. He hesitated for a moment and then bitterly smiled. I originally planned to replace elder senior apprentice brother and extend Peach Maiden's life after I returned. But now that my great Tao isn't right, I don't dare to take any more risks. So, I will have to trouble elder senior apprentice brother to continue bearing the burden. The elder senior apprentice brother solemnly said, Junior apprentice brother, there is no need to be like this. Honorable Master's graciousness to me is as heavy as a mountain. If it weren't for him saving me in the past, I would have died long ago. Junior apprentice, Sister Peach Maiden, is Honorable Master's only daughter. Now that Honorable Master is no longer here, I am willing to do anything for her without any reluctance. He could hear the sincerity in his elder senior apprentice brother's words without the slightest bit of falsehood. After Chinyu sighed inwardly, he felt a bit of admiration. Thinking for a moment, he flipped his hand and took out a fruit. This was the fruit he had obtained from the Wind Saint when he was in World Zero. It could be used to enhance one's great Tao. Unfortunately, Chinyu had relied on the cheating method of the Great Furnace to condense his great Tao. He didn't need to do anything during the process, so he naturally didn't have any leeway to interfere. As such, he didn't have a chance to use this fruit. And even if he did, Chinyu wouldn't waste it. His great Tao had already been shattered twice. If he used this fruit, it would at most increase the power of his great Tao shattering sword by a bit, and then that would be it. Now that he gave it to his elder senior apprentice brother, it should be of some help to him. It was a suitable gift. Elder senior apprentice brother, I don't have anything suitable in my hands right now. This fruit is beneficial to the great Tao, so consider it a little compensation. I ask that you accept it. Looking at Chinyu's earnest expression, the elder senior apprentice brother shook his head and smiled. All right. Then I must thank junior apprentice brother for your kind intentions. Chinyu stood up. He cupped his hands together and said, Concerning the great Tao, I still have some questions. I will need to temporarily leave the peach garden to find an explanation. As he spoke, he bitterly smiled. Recently, I've discovered that I've been incomparably busy. I haven't had a single moment of free time. The elder senior apprentice brother coughed. Junior apprentice brother, are you trying to tell me that the greater one's ability is, the greater one's responsibility? Chinyu was stunned. He never thought that his elder senior apprentice brother would joke around with him. And what was even more embarrassing was that he really did have such thoughts. Ha ha ha. Across from him, the elder senior apprentice brother laughed. He reached out and patted Chinyu's shoulder. Right now, the junior apprentice brothers and sisters of the Peach Garden are all in seclusion. Once you resolve your troubles and settle down, we can gather together and have a good drink. This can also be considered a celebration of the Peach Garden's rebirth. Chinyu cupped his hands together. Of course. He bid his farewells and left. He stopped the inquisitive Bai Feng outside the door and tossed her a few words. If you have any questions, go find your elder senior apprentice brother. Then he summoned a portal and stepped inside. Bai Feng was left behind with a constipated expression. She stood outside the elder senior apprentice brother's courtyard, a bitter smile on her face. If I could ask elder senior apprentice brother, I wouldn't have to rush over to stop you after I received the news. As for the great Tao shattering and condensing, I really want to know just what happened. Aha! If one inadvertently offended a powerhouse, they would inevitably feel restless and uneasy at first, fearing that they would suffer retaliation. But if a powerhouse grew stronger and stronger, they would soon be like the sun in the sky. Perhaps they would even take a step further and look down on all others. At that point, they wouldn't be afraid. There was no other reason. The disparity between them was too great, like the difference between heaven and earth. With the other's status, how could they possibly lower themselves to do something so boring as revenge? This was the approximate mental journey of the dragon girl during this period of time. At this time, she was comfortably lying down on a soft chair, gently swinging her tail that had come out of nowhere. Her eyes were half closed, as if she were about to fall asleep. Great changes had occurred in Vastyong, but no one was willing to provoke them. The tyrannical dragon saint who occupied the East Sea, as a direct bloodline descendant of the dragon girl, still enjoyed peace and stability. At this time, it was unknown what she was thinking about, but her lips curved up in a smile. This smile was light, but it hid a bit of pride. After all, this matter was the most dazzling experience of the dragon girl's life. Although she didn't realize this at the beginning, it didn't stop her from secretly feeling proud. Hee, looking at Vastyong, how many people could provoke Chinyu and still escape unscathed? You can go ahead and take a look. Starting from the Netherworld Saint, all the other formidable existences that came after Chinyu were either wounded or killed. The title of the saint slaughtering specialist wasn't just for show. With Chinyu's current prestige and influence, there was no one that could compare with him besides a ruler. This dragon girl was the one that had offended Chinyu, and not just once. Yet she was still alive and kicking, ignoring everything else. Just this point alone was enough to make her submit. However, even to this day, the dragon girl still found it hard to believe. Back at the East Sea's birthday banquet, that common-looking little disciple of Peach Garden who had followed Peach Garden around her, had actually managed to achieve his current achievements in such a short period of time. Every time she thought of this, she wondered if she was dreaming. Due to the intense thoughts in her mind, her drowsiness faded a little. The dragon girl yawned and ungracefully stretched her back. Perhaps because she was in the inner hall, she was dressed very casually. Now that her chest was half unbuttoned and her waist was exposed, her good figure was on full display. Coupled with the small and exquisite tail behind her, she exuded a particularly seductive aura. Chinyu didn't expect to see such an alluring scene as soon as he stepped in. Immediately, a trace of embarrassment appeared on his face. He had locked onto the dragon girl's aura and descended directly. He wanted to enter the East Sea Dragon Palace through her so that the old dragon wouldn't be scared away. After all, Chinyu had heard of the reputation of the saint slaughtering specialist. Previously, under the watchful eyes of countless sages, he had killed Sage Zhou and Sage Lin. It would be strange if the dragon sage wasn't afraid of him rashly descending upon the East Sea. After all, Chinyu previously had a black record. In the East Sea Dragon Palace, he had joined hands with the Yard Master to take away the Sword of the East Sea. Of course, another reason was that the Peach Garden had established a stable passageway with this place. Descending here was the easiest and fastest. The dragon girl's expression changed. Her eyes emitted a cold light. Who is it? The next moment, the cold dragon girl's face turned pale. Looking at the person below the hall, she couldn't help but tremble. It's him. It's him. The dragon girl would never forget his appearance. Even if he turned into ashes, she would still be able to recognize him. Chinyu had come. He had quietly barged into the inner hall and stood in front of me. Who would believe that he didn't mean anything? The dragon girl instantly thought too much. What narrow-minded? What killing a dragon for revenge? All kinds of terrifying thoughts collided in her mind. It's over. It's over. Not to mention that her father wasn't here. Even if he was here, he wouldn't be able to resist Chinyu. No one could save her today. Thinking of this, the dragon girl burst into tears. Her tears and snot flowed down her face. She looked extremely miserable and heartbroken. Chinyu was embarrassed. Looking at the weeping and despairing dragon lady, Zhang Xian knew that he had frightened her even if he used his knees to think. As for this, what happened in the past was already in the past. Was there a need for him to bother with a little girl? But thinking about it carefully, he had rashly rushed in, and it really did seem as if he had bad intentions. It was no wonder that the dragon girl was so frightened. "Don't cry." As soon as she said this, the dragon girl cried even more fiercely. "I'm about to die, and yet you don't allow me to cry? This is going too far." Yu looked up at the skies, but all he could see was endless seawater. He felt even more depressed. He rubbed his temples and said, "If you cry again, I'll change my mind and really attack you." The dragon girl sobbed. Her red eyes were wide with tears as she stared at Yu with disbelief. Yu was incomparably annoyed by her gaze. He coldly sneered, "What sort of status do I have? Do I need to be sneaky to kill a little girl like you? Hurry up and put on your clothes so you can send me into the East Sea."